Chapter 7:10. Looking at the disciple's changing face, Zhang Xiaohua educated him again. Besides, I have already made an appointment with you. Are you waiting for me to start? If I were to sneak attack you, what would you call it just now? You. The disciple was speechless. He waved his hand and said, Brothers of the Misty Hall, the little medicine boy of the pill expanding hall from the fragrant school is bullying people in our serene peak. This is unbearable. We can't let him bully us. Then, he said to Zhang Xiaohua, Come on, little medicine boy. Let this young master see what you are capable of. After that, he turned to the disciples and said, Go, let the pill-expanding school see our misty halls. Hearing this, the disciples at the side were all eager to give it a try. They held their long swords and were about to rush forward. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua leaped down from his horse. Without waiting for the disciple to finish his words, he rushed in front of him and waved his left hand. Slap, slap, slap. He gave the disciple 2 tight slaps on the face. Then, he grabbed the disciple's neck as if he was holding a chick. Looking at the disciple's face gradually turning red and his eyes bulging, Zhang Xiaohua said disdainfully, I used to hear the senior brothers talk about the Misty School and the deeds of the Misty School's disciples. So, I have always looked forward to the disciples of the Misty School. I thought they were the real men of the Jianghu. Similarly, I also thought that the disciples of the Misty Hall were heroes. But now, it seems that they are nothing more than this. You are unworthy of the name Misty. Look at what you have become now, using hidden weapons to attack an unknown disciple from the dark. You don't care if the disciple knows martial arts or not. When the sneak attack failed, you still want to bet. When you lose the bet, you want to gang up on the disciple. What kind of behavior is this? This is the lowly behavior of the Jianghu. A decent man of the Jianghu would never do this. Do you think that with what you have done today, you are worthy of the name Misty? Are you worthy of the seniors of the Misty School who defended the name Misty? Then, she sighed and said, Forget it, forget it. The Misty Hall is nothing more than this. After saying that, she shook her hand and the disciple was easily thrown to the ground. He could only gasp for breath and couldn't get up for a long time. This group of young disciples, when they were 12 or 13 years old, had encountered the great change in the Misty School. Before they could break out with the other disciples, they were captured by the Righteous Alliance and the other 2 sections. During that time, they had seen many of their senior brothers being murdered. They had long regarded the disciples of the incense cult, the Righteous Alliance, and the Dalan Temple as their enemies. Even now, in the incense cult, their hearts were still restless. As long as they had the chance, they would take the disciples of the other halls who were on duty at the serene peak to give them trouble. They didn't care if the disciples knew martial arts or not. After a long time, they had already gotten used to it. Now that Zhang Xiaohua had said those words, their faces changed. It was unknown whether it was because they were ashamed or because they were shocked by Zhang Xiaohua's strength. Most of their eyes flickered and didn't dare to look at Zhang Xiaohua. There were also a few who were eager to fight, but no one dared to make the first move. In a hurry, they didn't dare to step forward. Seeing the reaction of the disciples, Zhang Xiaohua secretly nodded. She couldn't expect all the disciples to be reasonable. Most of them could listen to unpleasant words. The Misty Hall was still the Misty School of the past. The disciple that Zhang Xiaohua had thrown to the ground blushed. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's tall, thin figure and somewhat childish face, he gritted his teeth, walked up to Zhang Xiaohua, turned over, and knelt down. How could Zhang Xiaohua let him kneel down? She immediately pulled him back and smiled. Senior brother, what do you want? It's not a festive occasion. I don't have any copper coins to give. The disciple struggled hard but couldn't move an inch. He was even more surprised and smiled bitterly. I am Lu Qiao Gang of the Misty Hall. Junior brother, you're right. Let's not talk about the hidden weapon just now. Since I have lost the bet just now, I have to kowtow. This, Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. She was just casually talking about her disappointment with the disciples of the Misty Hall. She didn't think that it would enlighten them. If this disciple really kowtowed to her, if they knew her identity, then wouldn't she? After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, The bet is a bet. Logically speaking, you should kneel down to me. However, a man should not kneel down. I think you just casually said the conditions of the bet and fell into my trap. I am also in the wrong. If you feel that you are in the wrong today, then return to the Misty Hall and kowtow to the seniors in your hall. It was Lu Xiaogang's turn to hesitate. When it came to kneeling down, he was also hot-blooded and wanted to kneel down. Now that he was slightly sober, he knew that if he kneeled down, it would make him look noble. However, it would also make him lose face. He had lost a lot of face. When he returned to the hall, people would talk about the reason. Those who knew would say that he was in the wrong and kept his promise. But what about those who didn't know? They would definitely say that he was a coward. Sigh. Lu Xiaogang sighed. It's hard to be a true hero. Then, he borrowed the ladder and came down. He cupped his hands and said, Senior Ren, you are magnanimous. You are the role model of my generation. Thank you for your guidance today. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, You are too kind. In the future, I will have to live with the support of the disciples of the Misty Hall. We will understand and support each other. At this moment, Lu Xiaogang thought of the purpose of Zhang Xiaohua's visit to the Serene Peak. He smiled and said, Senior Run, please wait for a moment. After he finished speaking, he took out a signal and prepared to report to the Serene Peak. When the disciples saw that the two of them had turned hostility into friendship, they were all happy. A few disciples came over and greeted Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua returned their greetings and said a few words. Then, she asked, By the way, I heard that there is a disciple called Zhang Xiaohu in your hall. How is he doing now? Zhang Xiaohu? When the disciples heard this name, their faces changed and their expressions became strange. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she couldn't help but wonder. She asked, Is there no such disciple? Or did something happen to Zhang Xiaohu? A disciple blinked and asked curiously, Senior Run, how do you know Senior Zhang's name? Zhang Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, This one also participated in the Yulan Dusk refinement. It was your hall's senior brother Zhang Xiaohu who rescued this one from the Yulan Grand Canyon. Huh, you are the disciple of the Pill Tower Hall that Senior Zhang rescued? The disciple said in disbelief, Senior Rin's martial arts seems to be higher than Senior Zhang's. How could he be rescued by him? Haha, I was seriously injured at that time. If not for Senior Zhang's help, I would have been buried in the stomach of a beast. Then, she asked, Is Senior Zhang in the Serene Peak now? What happened? The disciples hesitated and said, Senior Zhang is indeed in the Serene Peak, but after a long time, they couldn't say anything. Zhang Xiaohua was anxious and was about to urge them. At this time, Lu Xiaogang had already set up the signal. He waved his hand, and a whistling arrow flew into the air. He then said with a smile, Senior Ren, wait a moment. There will be a senior brother coming to pick you up. Zhang Xiaohua didn't care who was coming to pick him up. She just asked, What happened to Senior Zhang? Lu Xiaogang smiled bitterly. I can't tell you. But Senior Zhang's situation is not good. I heard it from others. I didn't see it myself. Zhang Xiaohua's heart thumped. She was about to ask when she saw a colorful signal flying from the direction Zhang Xiaohua came from. It was similar to the signal of the inner disciple that Zhang Xiaohua saw in the Yulan Grand Canyon. Lu Xiaogang was shocked and shouted, The signal of an inner disciple? Could it be that an inner disciple came to the Serene Peak to ask about the Yulan Grand Canyon? Quickly go down the mountain to pick him up. I will. Before the voice fell, there was a rush of horse hooves from the mountain road. Everyone looked up and saw several horses galloping down from the Serene Peak. The first one was a 25 or 26 years old disciple. When he came close, he saw Zhang Xiaohua and frowned. He turned his head and asked, Junior Brother Lu, why did you send the signal of our sect? Lu Xiaogang stepped forward and said, Senior Brother Ding, this senior brother is the disciple on duty sent by the pill-expanding hall of Baiyue Peak. I will inform the senior brothers on the mountain to find someone to pick him up. Senior Brother Ding was obviously surprised. He looked at Zhang Xiaohua unkindly and said, How can I have time to pick him up? Didn't you see that the inner disciples are all at the foot of the mountain? You just need to stay here and watch him. At this moment, the hall masters must be ready to welcome the inner disciples. They don't have time to pay attention to him. Anyway, we just need to go up the mountain. When the inner disciples come up the mountain, let him follow them. Seeing that this senior brother was disrespectful to Zhang Xiaohua, Lu Qiaogang was afraid that Zhang Xiaohua would attack him in anger. He looked at Zhang Xiaohua with some apprehension. He saw that Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, "It doesn't matter. It is important to welcome the inner disciples. I will wait here." While they were talking, the horns sounded loudly on the mountain peak, and then several tall horses came down the mountain. Senior fellow apprentice Ding did not dare to delay and said, "Forget it, junior fellow apprentice Lu, come with me. You don't have to wait anymore." Deputy Hall Master Zhong and Deputy Hall Master Qin have also come down the mountain. We'd better hurry to the front to welcome the inner disciples. After that, the group of disciples left Zhang Xiaohua aside and rode down the mountain. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the dust and could not help but smile bitterly. She wanted to ask about the news of her second brother, but it seemed that she should forget it. She would see him in a while. Whether he was good or bad, she would know. While she was thinking, the people from the mountain had already approached. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly pulled the big black horse and Huan Huan, who liked to walk in the middle of the road, aside. Several big horses galloped on the road. Suddenly, a woman's exclamation came from the horse near Zhang Xiaohua. "Hey!" When Zhang Xiaohua looked, it was a woman in black sitting on the horse. Her eyes were fixed on her, and there was a trace of surprise in her eyes. -3. Chapter 7:11. Hearing Yang Rupiang's question, the masked Chen Chun smiled and said, "Hall Master Yang's doubts have already been considered by Lord Sect Leader. This Zhang Xiaohu has only cultivated the ethereal divine art for 4 to 5 years and is only at the entry level. Even if he cultivates for another 30 to 50 years, it is impossible for him to reach the peak. However, if he cultivates the Suhuan mental cultivation method, and with the help of the Suhuan pill, he can definitely reach the next level in a short period of time. It is even possible for him to reach the peak of the Suhuan mental cultivation method within 20 years. But Yang Rupiang still wanted to continue, but she was stopped by the masked Chen Chun. Chen Chun said coldly, "Hall Master Yang, I respect you as my senior sister, so I have always answered your questions. But don't you think it's disrespectful to His Excellency when you keep questioning me when I'm passing on the decree of His Excellency? If it was anyone else, this envoy would have already taken them down. Thus, I ask Hall Master Yang to sit down quietly. It won't be too late to continue speaking after the sect leader's decree is passed on." Yang Rupiang's face darkened, and she lowered her head and returned to her seat. Seeing that when Wenhai was about to stand up, the masked Qinshin immediately said, "Hero Zhang Xiaohu, you should also sit down. This is merely a gift from Lord Sect Leader to Zhang Xiaohu. There is no need to implicate too many people. It is better for him to choose what is more important and what is less important." After speaking, she handed the brocade box to Chen Chun. Chen Chun quickly looked at Zhang Xiaohu. What choice did Zhang Xiaohu have? In his heart, he was just a cripple. What ethereal divine art? What Suhuan mental cultivation method? They had nothing to do with him. Since it was a gift from Lord Sect Leader, it was fine for him to take it. Perhaps he could leave it for Chang'e to use in the future. Thus, he didn't need to think too much and nodded slightly. "Very good." The masked Chen Chun smiled and casually handed the brocade box to Chen Chun. She then turned around and sat back in her seat. Then, he looked at Yang Rupiang and said with a smile, "Hall Master Yang, this envoy has completed the 3 tasks ordered by Sir Religion Master. If Hall Master Yang has any questions, you can ask them now." Then, he changed the topic and said, "However, before we came, Lord Sect Leader had already instructed us that the foundation of Zhang Xiaohu's misty divine art is very shallow. Moreover, it conflicts with the Su Huan Heart Sutra, so we might as well dissolve the inner strength that he had cultivated in the past." This, Yang Rupiang and Wenhai were both shocked. However, Qinshin waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, I've already checked his meridians just now. There's no internal energy in his meridians. Only some of the cinnabar fruit's medicinal effects are still there. This saves me a lot of effort." Then he cast a sideways glance at Zhong Pei and said, "This might be a good deed done by some people. However, now it has helped Zhang Xiaohu. He can directly cultivate the Suhuan heart technique." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu was greatly shocked. That day, Zhao Jian's palm had indeed hit his dantian. Zhao Jian had even checked it. Why did the envoy of lingering fragrance peak not notice it now? However, if Zhao Jian's palm had no effect, where did his decades of internal energy go? At this time, he heard the masked Qinshan say, in addition, Sir Religion Master knows that Zhang Xiaohu is a direct disciple of the original Misty School. Considering that the cultivation method of the Misty School is not bad, he also agreed that Zhang Xiaohu can cultivate the Misty Divine Art in addition to cultivating the Suhuan Heart Technique. Although these words were dignified, the meaning was clear. That was, Zhang Xiaohu must first cultivate the Suhuan Heart Technique before he can cultivate the Misty Divine Art, as long as he is not afraid of Qigong deviation. Alas, Yang Ruping and Wen Wenhai both sighed in their hearts. The situation was stronger than the person. Since they were under the roof of the fragrance cult, it was impossible for them to not listen to Sir Religion Master's orders. They could only cup their hands and say, "Thank you, Sir Religion Master, for your kindness." Good, good, good. The masked Qinshan clapped his hands and said, "Since everyone is very happy, this envoy's trip can be considered to have ended satisfactorily." Then, he glanced at Zhang Xiaohua, who was sitting at the end of the table, and said to Yang Ruping, "Master Yang, Ren Xiaoyao of the Pill-Opening Hall was saved by Zhang Xiaohu of the Misty Hall, and he also helped Xia Zai of the Misty Hall to set her bones. Now he has come to the Misty Hall to be a disciple on duty. It is estimated that there will be a long time in the future. I hope you won't be too harsh on him for his sake." This kind of thing was really insignificant to Yang Ruping. Moreover, the Misty Hall had changed a lot at this time, so how could she care about this? She naturally nodded and said yes. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua hurried forward to greet Yang Ruping and Aunt Qin again and thank Qinshan. At this time, the masked Qinshan said to him, "Qinshan, come here." Qinshan was puzzled. He looked at Chang'e and walked to the masked Qinshan. The masked Qinshan carefully looked up and down for a while and said with a smile, "What a lovely child. You almost died under the trap of Zhao Jian." After that, he took out a jade pendant and threw it to Qinshan. Qinshan caught it and heard the masked Qinshan say with a smile, "Well, I know you now. Qinshan, if you are bullied in the fragrance cult in the future, you can tell them my name. I guarantee that no one will dare to take advantage of you." Qinshan was stunned and turned to look at Chang'e. Seeing Chang'e nod, he said softly, "I just don't know. Sister's name is..." This sister was really forced. It was even more awkward than Zhang Xiaohua that day. The masked Qinshan seemed to have guessed the answer to the riddle and was in a very good mood. He laughed and said, "Although it's not easy for others to remember my sister's name, it's really easy for you to remember." Zhang Xiaohua, who knew the details, couldn't help but secretly curl her lips and sneer. Qinshan said softly, then, "Sister, please tell me." "Qinshan," the masked Qinshan said. "Yes, Lord Messenger, please tell me." "Qinshan," the masked Qinshan still said. Qinshan was a little embarrassed and said, "Yes, Qinshan is here. Lord Messenger, please tell me." The masked Qinshan suppressed the smile in his heart and said, "Qinshan." Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but chuckle and whisper, "Junior Sister Chen, the messenger of Fragrance Peak is also called Qinshan." "Ah?" Qinshan exclaimed and revealed many small canine teeth. The masked Qinshan smiled and took her hand, saying, "Qinshan, in the future, you will be protected by Qinshan in the fragrance cult." Qinshan was also happy and bowed. "Thank you, Sister Qinshan." "Ha ha ha." The masked Qinshan turned to Yang Ruping and said with a smile, "Well, I have finished my mission and there are many things to do in the Misty Hall. I won't disturb Master Yang." Yang Ruping tried to persuade Qinshan to stay but failed, so she led the disciples to send Qinshan to Fragrance Peak. Zhang Xiaohua, as the representative of the Pill Expanding Hall, was also lucky to be there. When they were about to say goodbye, Qinshan called Zhang Xiaohua to the front and asked in a low voice, "Ren Xiaoyao, let me ask you, are there any secret marks on your body?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and asked confusedly, "I don't think so. What's wrong?" Qinshan smiled mysteriously and said, "You have held my hand and got married. Have you been touched all over your body? If you have any thoughts, it's better to check your entire body first. If there are any hidden marks that you don't know about, it's better to get rid of them as soon as possible." Don't wait for others to come knocking on your door, and you'll be at a loss. Zhang Xiaohua fell off the horse with a plop. Qinshan laughed and went down Shixin Peak. It was already late at night. In a small courtyard near the cliff of Shixin Peak, a tall and thin figure was standing in the middle of the courtyard. He stood with his hands behind his back and silently watched everything in the night. This person was the disciple on duty of the pill-expanding hall, Zhang Xiaohua. Chun Chun came to Shixin Peak to deal with the matter of Zhang Xiaohu. It only took him half a day to bring Zhong Pei back to Lingxiang Peak, put him to death, and gave Zhang Xiaohu a reward. After Chen Shen left, Aunt Qin ordered the disciples to make a good arrangement for Zhang Xiaohua. Because of Chen Chen's instructions to Yang Rupiying, and seeing that Zhang Xiaohua was familiar with Chen Chun, the disciples of the Misty Hall did not dare to neglect. However, the residence of the disciples on duty of the pill-expanding hall was far from the Misty Hall. It was impossible for the Misty Hall to move the pill-expanding hall close to the Misty Hall just for Zhang Xiaohua. Therefore, when she saw the apologetic expression of the disciples of the Misty Hall, Zhang Xiaohua felt gratified for a while. After the disciples of the Misty Hall left, Zhang Xiaohua led his big black horse and David's deer into the courtyard. After a few days of living together, Huan Huan had somewhat adapted to the aura of Little Black and Little Yellow. She could occasionally get close to them. At this time, when Zhang Xiaohua led her, she did not feel nervous. This was a very tidy little courtyard. There were 2 entrances and 2 exits, and there were a few small rooms. Zhang Xiaohua looked around carefully, and there was nothing that was out of the ordinary. Hence, he randomly picked one of the rooms to be his room and threw some of his belongings inside. Normally, he should be looking around the courtyard at this time, but first, it was late at night. Second, Zhang Xiaohu was seriously injured. When he heard from Chen Chun that the internal force in his meridians was completely gone, Zhang Xiaohua was worried. Therefore, he stood in the courtyard and thought about whether he should go and see his second brother. After thinking for a while and looking at the sky, Zhang Xiaohua made an incantation and went underground. He went straight to the Misty Hall during the day. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua came to the Misty Hall. At this time, the Misty Hall was still brightly lit. Many things had happened during the day, and Yang Rupiying and the others were probably still discussing what to do after Zhong Pei left. Zhang Xiaohua sneaked into the Misty Hall and showed himself in an inconspicuous corner. At this time, the candles in the Misty Hall were flickering. Zhang Xiaohua did not find Zhang Xiaohu, Chang'e, and Chun Chun. There were only Yang Rupiying and Aunt Qin. Zhang Xiaohua looked around and wanted to escape, but he heard Yang Rupiying say, "Deputy Hallmaster Qin, today in the Misty Hall, Zhang Xiaohu's behavior was a little strange. I think." When he said this, he stopped. Aunt Qin asked, "Hallmaster Yang, if you have something to say, please say it." Deputy Hallmaster Qin, don't you think that Zhang Xiaohu didn't refuse at all and directly accepted the Sutra of Yuhuan Heart? Did he want to accept sect leaders' goodwill and let the Misty School? Please vote monthly. Please vote for recommendation. Please collect. Please tip. Thank you. -3. Chapter 712. Zhang Xiaohua entered the alchemy room, looked around, and put the 8 trigrams purple gold furnace into his belt. Even the jade boxes that were piled up in the alchemy room were swept clean. Previously, he didn't have much space to store them in his money pouch, but now that he had a belt, he naturally had to take them with him. Thinking that there were still some jade boxes left in the small courtyard on the mountainside, Zhang Xiaohua didn't plan to tidy them up. The extremely precious medicinal herbs had already been brought to the mountaintop by him, and most of the remaining ones had been taken by him. The rest were just ordinary goods, and compared to what he had obtained in the Yulon Grand Canyon, it was just a drop in the ocean. Moreover, those jade boxes were known to all the disciples of Tianmu Peak. If he took them away, wouldn't it raise suspicions? When the alchemy room was empty, Zhang Xiaohua took out his bag from his money pouch and slung it over his shoulder. Finally, his gaze fell on the great wisdom sword that was inserted into the ground. After thinking for a moment, Zhang Xiaohua slightly gritted his teeth and released his divine sense, trying to put it into his money pouch. However, the great wisdom heavy sword was like a boulder in the wind. It could not be moved by the divine sense at all, let alone put it into the money pouch. Zhang Xiaohua was very curious and thought to himself, what material is this heavy sword made of? Even my divine sense can't move it. Immediately, he tried to use the object controlling technique. When the technique hit the sword, it was like a dragonfly trying to shake a stone pillar. It didn't move at all. Zhang Xiaohua was delighted. The more peculiar this sword was, the more precious it was. But immediately, he frowned. Huan wasn't here, and ordinary horses couldn't carry it. He also had to follow Yang Yao to Serene Peak. It seemed that he couldn't take the great wisdom sword away for the time being. However, it didn't matter. Other than Zhang Xiaohua, there might not be anyone in Chuanxiang cult who could pick it up. Not to mention putting it in the alchemy room. Even if he left it halfway up the mountain, it would still be safe. After looking around and seeing that there was nothing else, Zhang Xiaohua formed a hand seal and left the cave. She followed the path down the mountain. Halfway through, they saw Lu Chaoxian, Senior Wang, and the others walking up to them. They couldn't help but exchange some words when they saw each other. Under Lu Chaoxian's urging, they accompanied Zhang Xiaohua to the courtyard. At this time, Yang Yao, Qin Fengxiao, and Wu Zhouxu were talking in the yard. A handsome big black horse was tied to one side. When they saw Zhang Xiaohua come in, they all went forward to welcome her. What Wu Zhouxu saw was the package slung over her shoulder. Wu Zhouxu's eyes twitched for no reason, and there was a bitter taste in his mouth. He muttered in his heart, "Where did she hide the package? He actually made me search for several days without any results." Sigh. Fortunately, something happened to Vice Hall Master Su. Otherwise, that's right. If Vice Hall Master Su was still around, Wu Zhouxu would have to follow Vice Hall Master Su's orders and go against Zhang Xiaohua. Wouldn't that put him in a difficult position? Sending Zhang Xiaohua off was simple. Since Yang Yao was in a hurry, all they did was send Zhang Xiaohua out of the courtyard. After exchanging a few words of farewell, the two of them mounted their horses, shook the reins, and went down the mountain. After passing a bend, Zhang Xiaohua pulled the reins and turned the horse around. She took a closer look at the towering Tianmu Peak. It had only been a few months since she entered the incense cult and left Tianmu Peak. So many things had happened. Some of these things might have become stories that were passed down by word of mouth among the disciples of Tianmu Peak. However, most of them had become eternal secrets that no one knew about. The mountain remained the same, but the people had changed. Perhaps this was the sorrow of being a human. Zhang Xiaohua then turned the horse around and chased after Yang Yao. She left Tianmu Peak, the people of Tianmu Peak, and the matters of Tianmu Peak behind her. After descending Tianmu Peak, Yang Yao led Zhang Xiaohua in the direction of Baiyu Peak. Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that Martial Uncle Yang wants me to go to the pill expanding hall by myself? She quickly caught up and asked, "Martial Uncle Yang, this road seems to lead to the pill expanding hall. I heard from the senior brothers of Tianmu Peak that Serene Peak should be in another direction." Yang Yao smiled. "Nephew, you should know that this old man is bringing you along a remote path." Remote path? Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. From Yulon Grand Canyon to Tianmu Peak, they had taken a remote path which made it difficult for her meridians to recover. Why was it still a remote path from Tianmu Peak to Serene Peak? Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's surprise, Yang Yao explained, "Nephew entered the sect late and did not know this. Although the 19 peaks of Tianmu Peak are connected by roads, most of the disciples feel that the road is too far. Most of the time, they take a shortcut and take a small path. As more and more people take this path, the road becomes more and more obvious. Therefore, if it is not a formal occasion, many people will take some unknown paths to save a lot of time. This time, nephew should have asked someone to send you to Serene Peak. After all, this is your first time there, but the situation on Baiyu Peak. Oh, everyone is very busy, so this old man volunteered to send you there. I still have other things to do, so I can only take this shortcut and not waste time." Zhang Xiaohua cupped her hands. "Thank you, Martial Uncle Yang, for your concern." "Haha," Yang Yao was very happy. "It's no matter. You can be considered as someone I personally brought into Tianmu Peak. Your progress is also my pride." That year, Lu Lihong. I heard that this time, Martial Nephew Lu finally obtained the opportunity to refine Yulon Grand Canyon, but then he encountered the beast tide. His luck and martial arts are wasted. Yang Yao sighed several times, feeling pity for Lu Lihong. Zhang Xiaohua's face was full of disdain. Although his martial arts are good, his heart is sinister. That kind of martial arts will only harm others. It is better not to have such a person. Seeing Yang Yao speak as if he was speaking the truth, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was half relieved. However, Yang Yao was also good to her. Zhang Xiaohua did not suspect him, but she could not prevent others from using Yang Yao. It was not impossible to set up an ambush in such a remote place. However, would Zhang Xiaohua care about such a trivial ambush? And, do I care about your ambush? The answer was naturally no. Zhang Xiaohua's divine ability did not need to be mentioned. Even the internal injuries that could not be healed for a long time had completely healed today. The recovery of her injuries was beyond Zhang Xiaohua's expectations. It was only when she came down from Tianmu Peak that she realized it. After 2 days and 2 nights of comprehending the heavenly Tao, not only did her cultivation of the Heart Sutra improve, even the injuries that she had deliberately delayed had healed without leaving any traces. However, Zhang Xiaohua did not know whether it was because of her cultivation of the Heart Sutra or because of her comprehension of the heavenly Tao. Raising her guard, Zhang Xiaohua followed Yang Yao along the desolate path for half a day. When it was almost sunset, Yang Yao turned his horse around and headed in another direction. Looking at the faint traces of a small path on the ground, Zhang Xiaohua stroked her chin and followed without hesitation. However, after half a meal's time, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She pulled on the reins and stopped the horse. Yang Yao, who was in front of her, also stopped. He asked puzzledly, "What's wrong? Virtuous nephew Run, are you tired?" Following which, he slapped his forehead and said, "Look at me. I forgot that you are still injured. I have been running for half a day without stopping the horse. I believe you can't hold on any longer." Yang Yao raised his head and looked around. He pointed to a gentle slope in front and said, "Let's go. We have set up our tents on that slope. We will rest there today. Haha, not to mention you. Even my old bones are aching." As he spoke, he shook the reins and slowly moved forward. Zhang Xiaohua still stood there without moving. Looking at Yang Yao's back, she seemed to be deep in thought. After thinking for a while, she raised her head and let out a low whistle. That whistle wasn't loud, but it was abnormally clear. Her voice wasn't very loud and could only be heard in the wilderness. Hearing Zhang Xiaohua's whistle, Yang Yao was also surprised. He stopped the horse and turned to look at Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua ignored him and leaped onto the horse's back. He stood there steadily and looked around, causing Yang Yao to feel rather puzzled. Just when Yang Yao was puzzled, in the distance to the left, there was a hurried rustling sound from the grass and trees, following which there were a few low neighs that sounded like the neighing of a horse. Looking over, there was a wild beast that looked like a donkey and a horse that wasn't a horse. Wasn't it Zhang Xiaohua's lost mount, David's deer? Huan, Zhang Xiaohua stood on the horse's back and unconsciously felt tears in her eyes. Huan had been with her for so long. Although she didn't usually use it and felt that it didn't matter if she had it or not, it would still eat grass around her. When she really couldn't see it, her heart immediately felt empty, especially when she was tidying up the great wisdom sword. She missed this ugly mount even more. Zhang Xiaohua didn't expect to actually meet it here. At that time, her heart was moved. She thought that there would be an ambush from the Pill Tower Hall ahead. When Huan ran closer, Zhang Xiaohua jumped off the horse's back. Huan immediately intimately came forward and stuck out its tongue to lick Zhang Xiaohua's face. But just as it came close, its sensitive nose sniffed as if it felt a huge threat. It raised its head and neighed, then immediately retreated, as if Zhang Xiaohua was a familiar stranger. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua was also stunned. She immediately realized that there were 2 little monsters in her arms. Ordinary horses might not be able to smell it, but how could a somewhat intelligent beast like Huan not know? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and patted her chest. She used her hand to beckon Huan to come over. Her expression was like a wet nurse who was about to breastfeed. However, Huan was like a child who had made a mistake. Its big eyes flickered with fear as it vigorously shook its head. When Zhang Xiaohua took 2 steps forward, it took 2 steps back. When Zhang Xiaohua stood still, it also stood still, but it didn't dare to take another step forward. After trying a few times, Zhang Xiaohua was quite helpless. It must be said that the mother of the two little things in her arms was the Beast King who commanded the Yulon Grand Canyon. How could a spirit beast like Huan Huan, who had never seen the world, dare to approach? Yang Yao looked at the side and also said with heartache, "AI, look at this four odd beasts. I don't know what those disciples did a few days ago. They didn't even let a beast go." Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. -3. Chapter 7:13. In the end, Huan Huan did not dare to get within 3 feet of Zhang Xiaohua. However, Zhang Xiaohua was very happy to see Huan Huan. Therefore, Huan Huan followed behind the big black horse and went up the gentle slope. After helping Yang Yao pack up, Zhang Xiaohua quietly stuffed Little Black and Little Yellow into her bag. Then, she walked over to Huan Huan, who had been pacing back and forth beside her. The 4 odd beasts, who had gained human intelligence, looked at Zhang Xiaohua with their eyes. They looked like children who wanted to go home and admit their mistakes, but couldn't find an excuse to do so. When it saw Zhang Xiaohua walking towards it, Huan Huan took a step back as usual. However, it immediately raised its bald head and ran towards her as if it was cheering. It stuck out its tongue and licked Zhang Xiaohua's face. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and stretched out her hand to cover her face. Huan Huan was very happy. Its soft tongue licked Zhang Xiaohua's hand. It was ticklish but very comfortable. After a moment of intimacy, Zhang Xiaohua patted Huan Huan's head. She looked around and saw that there were many whip marks on Huan Huan's body. However, they were almost healed. Other than that, there were not many changes. It was even fatter than when it was on Tianmu Peak. Only its fur was glossy. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "This guy is really a glutton. His days here seem to be more comfortable than when he was on Tianmu Peak." Not long after, the sun set in the west and night came as usual. Zhang Xiaohua waited for Yang Yao to fall asleep. She immediately sealed his acupoints and set up a restriction around him. After casting a spell, she stood up and rushed towards Tianmu Peak. When she saw the odd beast Huan Huan, Zhang Xiaohua knew that her great wisdom sword did not have to be locked up in the boudoir anymore. When Zhang Xiaohua rose into the air, she realized that her wind-riding technique had improved. When she flew in the wind, she seemed to be able to blend in with her surroundings. Her speed was much faster, and the consumption of her genuine qi was much lower. Is this the result of comprehending the way of heaven again? Zhang Xiaohua was somewhat enlightened. Previously, whenever he had time, he would try to comprehend the way of heaven, but it didn't help him in his cultivation. Now, it seemed that the comprehension of the way of heaven was a slow process that produced fine work. It was just a small improvement, but it actually had so many reactions in his cultivation. It seemed that the comprehension of the way of heaven should be a main homework for his future cultivation. In the time it took for 2 meals, Zhang Xiaohua had flown to Heaven Eye Peak. He did not delay and directly entered the pill room. He took the great wisdom sword and was about to return. However, when he was halfway up the mountain, he remembered the small courtyard where he kept the jade box. Even though Qin Feng had smilingly promised to keep these medicinal herbs properly and that Zhang Xiaohua could come back to collect them in the future, he would be gone for many years. Who would have the patience to come and collect them? Who knows, someone might benefit from it. Hence, Zhang Xiaohua identified the direction and headed towards the small courtyard. Sigh, it was still the mentality of a small farmer. He didn't want to let others take advantage of him at all. The interior of the small courtyard was the same as before. Even the jade box in the room was the same as before. No one had moved it. It seemed that no one was interested in these medicinal herbs. Zhang Xiaohua did not need to light a lamp. He only released his divine sense and picked up the jade box with the medicinal herbs. With a pinch of an incantation, he kept it in his belt. The incantation of the Way of Immortals was very strange. He finished it in the time it took to smoke a cigarette. Seeing that there were still many empty jade boxes, Zhang Xiaohua unconsciously clapped his hands. He thought maliciously, after half a year, this Xiaoxiao will return. In front of Qin Feng, I will open these empty jade boxes. I want to see what kind of expression Head Master Chen will have. Hee hee. Maybe I can even get him to compensate me with some rare medicinal herbs. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly heard light footsteps outside the courtyard. Other than me, who else would be interested in these medicinal herbs? However, the footsteps stopped outside the wall. Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand what was going on. He made a hand seal and teleported to the other side of the wall. He listened carefully and heard a familiar voice. Senior brother Hu, why did you ask me to come here? Is it something important again? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He thought, this seems to be some spy I met on Tianmu Peak. As expected, another voice that Zhang Xiaohua was familiar with rang out. Sigh, I don't want to either. It's just that I received orders from Elder Qingming. There are some things that I need to hand over to Junior Marshal Brother Qian. Qingming? Junior Marshal Brother Qian was obviously stunned. He blurted out, isn't Elder Spring Equinox the only leader? Why is there another Qingming? He can't be a fake, right? How is that possible? Senior Marshal Brother who was full of disdain. He explained, ever since Lord Spring Equinox got into trouble, I have been worried that others might find out. In the end, one night, I was woken up by someone. When I saw that I was in the forest, I don't even know how I got there. Lord Qingming's cut and token are exactly the same as Lord Spring Equinox's. I think other than our own people, no one else would know about it. Then, what orders does Lord Qingming have? Yes, because Lord Spring Equinox's matter has attracted the attention of Lingering Fragrance Peak. Lord Qingming wants us to stop contacting each other frequently. We should lay low for now. Damn. If Senior Marshal Brother who doesn't call me, won't no one know about it? There's one more thing. Because a few of our brothers went missing, Lord Qingming thought that it was Lingering Fragrance Peak who did it. In order to prevent us from being exposed, he also organized some people to kill the ordinary disciples of Lingering Fragrance Peak and cause some chaos. So, he wants us to remind each other not to act rashly or have any other thoughts. I understand, Senior Marshal Brother Hu. But our Tianmu Peak is still very quiet. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua understood a little. This Lord Spring Equinox should be one of the leaders of this organization. He should have some status in Lingering Fragrance Peak. Thinking about it, it seemed that Deputy Hall Master Su should be very suitable for this condition. Could it be Deputy Hall Master Su? Zhang Xiaohua made a gesture and was about to go over and capture the two of them for questioning. But just as she was about to make a move, she suddenly felt happy. Am I not being a busybody? They are fighting with Lingering Fragrance Peak. Isn't it safer for me? Moreover, they have already stirred up the water. Who would suspect me? I should be encouraging them. How can I help the evildoer? If it's possible, I won't be stingy and give them a small banner of taking pleasure in helping others. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua had another thought. Just now, they said that Lingering Fragrance Peak has already noticed that a few people have gone missing. Moreover, they have also killed a few disciples of Lingering Fragrance Peak, causing chaos. I seem to have made a mistake. Immediately, she broke out in cold sweat. That day, Deputy Hall Master Su had killed Li Chong in order to silence him. For her own safety, she had taken Li Chong out to destroy the evidence. But now that she thought about it, wasn't she giving herself away? Li Chong was just an ordinary disciple of the Grass Division. If he went missing on a normal day, it wouldn't attract any attention. But now that he had gone missing and was even summoned by Deputy Hall Master Su, if the people of Lingering Fragrance Peak knew about it, they would definitely suspect her and Rejuvenation Valley. It would be hard to guarantee that Rejuvenation Valley wouldn't get into trouble. And this organization led by Lord Qingming had also caused a few ordinary disciples to go missing. They had done things that made it harder for people to distinguish between the truth and the lies. It had to be said that they had helped her. Sigh, I still don't have much experience. Zhang Xiaohua sighed in her heart. She resisted the urge to give the two of them a good person award. She formed a hand seal and flew down Tianmu Peak. With Bano's heavy sword, Zhang Xiaohua's wind-riding technique slowed down significantly. It took her longer to return than when she came, but she still managed to make it back before midnight. The gentle slope was as usual. The bonfire was about to extinguish. The two horses and the odd beast were resting by the side. Zhang Xiaohua fell from the sky. Huan Huan seemed to have sensed something. She raised her head to look, snorted, and walked away. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Yang Yao. She didn't unseal his acupoints. Instead, she sat cross-legged beside him and took out some key stones to recover her Jinqi. When he woke up the next day, Yang Yao was relieved. He practiced a set of fist techniques at the morning sun and said, "It's been a long time since I last camped outside. I even forgot about my insomnia and sleepwalking. It seems like I have to reminisce about the difficult times in the future." Zhang Xiaohua was sweating profusely. Zhang Xiaohua packed up her things and followed Yang Yao. She still had Xiao Huang and Xiao He in her arms, so Huan Huan could only follow behind. Yang Yao was stunned when he saw the sword on the back of the odd beast. He smiled and said, "Nephew Run, why are you still holding onto the sword embryo? You already have the Hallmaster's keepsake. Why don't you go to the Qingkuan Hall or the Blacksmith Hall to get a divine weapon?" Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, "I don't have anything useful right now. I'll take it first." Yang Yao didn't doubt her. He had already seen the Great Wisdom Sword on the way back to the incense order. Now that he saw it again, he just had to say a few words. The two of them continued on their journey. Occasionally, they would bump into a few other disciples on this remote road. They would all politely greet each other before brushing past each other. After another 2 days, Zhang Xiaohua could be considered to have completely dispelled his doubts. It seems that lingering fragrance peak doesn't have any ill intentions towards me. Elder Sage really sent me to Serene Peak for this matter. Early in the morning, after turning around a mountain valley, there was a huge mountain peak in front of them. It was much bigger than the Tianmu Peak. Yang Yao pointed with his finger and said with a smile, "Nephew Ron, this is the Serene Peak. If you can have a good relationship with the disciples of the Misty Hall, I estimate that you will live here for the next few years. When you complete the Hallmaster's task, there will be a lot of positions in the pill-expanding hall waiting for you." Then, he said some inexplicable words, which made Zhang Xiaohua very puzzled. Finally, he exhorted, "When you arrive at the Serene Peak, it's best that you don't have any conflicts with the disciples of the Misty Hall. They all practice martial arts. Well, if you have any opportunities, it's best to learn from them. This will also be beneficial for you to take the outer door assessment in the future." Thinking about her doubts about Yang Yao a few days ago, Zhang Xiaohua felt a little apologetic. She bowed deeply on the horse and said, "Thank you, Martial Uncle Yang, for your advice." After another half a day, they suddenly heard a shout from the side of the road. "Stop! Which disciple are you? You can't come to the Serene Peak so easily." -3. Chapter 7:14. Zhang Xiaohua was not surprised to see someone blocking the way. She had heard from Bai Huan that there were many experts from the fragrance cult guarding the foot of the Serene Peak. They forbade the disciples of other halls to enter and the disciples of the Misty Hall to go down the mountain. Sure enough, Yang Yao stopped the horse and dismounted. He took out a token and a yellow silk and handed them over. He smiled and said to the disciple, "I'm Yang Yao of the Pill-Sprouting Hall. I'm here to send my disciple Ren Xiaoyao to the Serene Peak. He's the new disciple on duty of the Pill-Sprouting Hall." "Oh?" The disciple took the token and silk and looked at them carefully. He turned his head and looked at Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua quickly dismounted and walked to the front. The disciple pointed to the David's deer behind him and asked, "What's this?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled apologetically and said, "This is my old mount. I'm used to it, so I brought it here." The disciple waved his hand and said, "Come here." Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled and walked to the front. The disciple suddenly reached out and patted on Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder. Zhang Xiaohua was even more puzzled. However, there was not much internal strength in the disciple's palm, so she could not hurt him. She ignored him and let him pat her shoulder. The disciple was surprised to see Zhang Xiaohua standing there straight and did not even sway. He looked back at Yang Yao and said, "This disciple is a little interesting. I remember that guy 3 months ago was slapped to the ground by me. He seemed to have stayed in the Serene Peak for a few days before the disciples of the Misty Hall found fault with him and broke his arm. I didn't expect that your Pill-Sprouting Hall could find such a good seedling, but..." Yang Yao smiled apologetically and said, "Yes, aren't all halls worried about this matter now? We just sent our disciples to be on duty, but the Misty Hall thought that they were going to plant a spy. They were all malicious. What can our hall master say about this matter? Our disciples are just messing around. We can't be too serious about it. It's not easy to find a disciple who can handle the situation. How can it be so simple? The disciple shook his head and said, Serene Peak is in a mess now. Several groups of disciples went to Lingxiang Peak. It's hard to say if your disciple went there. Alas, it's a pity. The continuous pity made Zhang Xiaohua curious. She cupped her hands and said, Senior, are the disciples of the Misty Hall so violent? Anyone who goes there will be broken arms and legs are broken. But Yang Yao asked curiously, What? They had fought all the way to Lingering Fragrance Peak? What's the matter? That disciple looked at Yang Yao snappily. How could you and I know about the incident at Lingering Fragrance Peak? Yang Yao was embarrassed. He smiled and said no more. The disciple turned to Zhang Xiaohua and said, You will know when you get there. However, I would like to give you a piece of advice. Being able to tolerate what others can't is the way to survive in the Misty Hall. Even if others challenge you to a duel, don't force yourself. You should know that although the Misty Hall has declined, there might still be a few unknown disciples waiting to deal with you. What does this have to do with me? Zhang Xiaohua said in her heart, This Xiaoxia is the direct disciple of Zhang Xiaohu. Who can do anything to me? However, she still cupped her hands and thanked this enthusiastic disciple. The disciple smiled and said, Go there. I hope you will behave yourself. Otherwise, you will be thrown off Serene Peak in a few days. Then, he casually handed the 2 tokens to Zhang Xiaohua and said to Yang Yao, Senior brother, I think you should return. You can only let this junior brother on duty pass. Okay. Yang Yao heard and hesitated for a moment. Then, he thanked Zhang Xiaohua and said, I have told you everything along the way. This place is far from the Pill Repository Hall, and there are no close disciples here. Everything depends on you. This disciple is right. Although your martial arts are strong, you are still lacking compared to the disciples of the Misty Hall. Don't try to be brave, and just follow the hall master's orders. Zhang Xiaohua's heart warmed when she saw Yang Yao acting like an old woman. She smiled and said, I know, Martial Uncle Yang. Come and pick me up in a few years. Okay. Yang Yao patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and said, Let's part here. I have other important matters to attend to in the Pill Repository Hall. If you have the chance to go back to White Mountain Peak, come and see this old man. After he finished speaking, he mounted his horse and rode away. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the enthusiastic old man and cupped her hands to the disciple on duty. Then, she mounted her horse and left for Serene Peak. Serene Peak was different from Tianmu Peak. The scenery was exceptionally beautiful, not to mention the green pines and cypresses, the flowing mountain springs, even the chirping of birds was intoxicating. Moreover, the yuan qi of heaven and earth on Serene Peak seemed to be stronger than on Tianmu Peak. Looking at the many medicinal fields at the foot of the mountain, it was easy to tell how many medicinal herbs were planted on Serene Peak. But looking at the ordinary herbs in the fields, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but sigh. That's right. These herbs are like weeds on Tianmu Peak. No wonder second brother insisted on bringing the 4 carts of herbs back. While she was thinking, Zhang Xiaohua went up the mountain path. Just as she was about to urge her horse to go up, she heard a soft sound in the air. A hidden weapon was aimed at her shoulder. Zhang Xiaohua had already seen clearly with her spiritual awareness that the hidden weapon was an iron lotus seed. She frowned and thought, how can the disciples of the Misty School treat people like this? It's different from what I imagined. Zhang Xiaohua was born in Huanxi Villa, which was a branch of the Misty School. She had always been looking forward to joining the Misty School. She had only been in and out of the Misty School for a few times, but she felt that the whole sect was full of vitality. Every disciple would have a smile on their face and would greet people politely. The unhappiness in the pharmacy hall and the embarrassing things that happened to Zhang Xiaohu were all forgotten by her consciously or unconsciously. Even by Huan's description, Yang Yao's advice, and the disciple on duty at the foot of the mountain were not taken seriously by Zhang Xiaohua. They obviously regarded her as a member of the Misty School and thought that they were exaggerating. She even felt a little conflicted. But now, she saw the disciple of the Misty School shoot out the hidden weapon without saying a word. If it were an ordinary disciple of the Pill Hall, Wouldn't his shoulder be injured? It seemed that the disciple at the foot of the mountain was not lying. The disciple of the pill hall who had his hands and feet broken must be true. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua was a little angry. What was the difference between him and the bullies in Lu Town if he bullied the weak with his martial arts? She wanted to make him suffer a little. But on the one hand, this was the Misty School. Maybe he was the junior fellow apprentice of her second brother. On the other hand, if she fought with him as soon as she arrived, wouldn't the senior fellow apprentice at the foot of the mountain be wasting his breath? So, Zhang Xiaohua's expression remained unchanged. She waved her right index finger and middle finger in front of her eyes and casually pinched the iron lotus seed between her fingers. Then she looked up at the tree next to her and said with a smile, "I wonder which senior fellow apprentice of the Misty School wants to make fun of me?" There was a cry of surprise from the tree next to her. Then several young disciples who were about the same age as Zhang Xiaohua jumped down. The one in the front was holding a sword in his right hand and something in his left hand. He walked forward and looked up and down. Then he looked at the four odd beasts behind Zhang Xiaohua. He did not salute and said loudly, "Who are you? Why did you barge into my Serene Peak?" "Your Serene Peak?" Zhang Xiaohua heard and laughed. "I am Ren Xiaoyao, a disciple of the Pill Hall's Serene Peak. I haven't asked for your name yet." "What are you laughing at?" The disciple was a little angry. "You are just a little apprentice of the Pill Hall. What is there to be proud of? I have seen a lot of people like you. Many of them have died in my hands. You seem to have some skills. Give me a reason. Otherwise, today will be the day you leave the mountain." Zhang Xiaohua curled her lips and sighed in her heart. Where is the magnanimity of a senior from the Misty School? But she said, "The 19 peaks of the incense cult naturally belong to the disciples of the incense cult. This Serene Peak used to belong to my Pill Hall, but now it has been allocated to your Misty Hall. When did it become your Misty Halls? How can I not laugh at your words?" The disciple was furious. Zhang Xiaohua's words could not be refuted. So he waved his sword and shouted, "You brat, don't pretend to have a glib tongue. Don't think that you are good at catching the hidden weapon. I didn't use my full strength. If you have the guts, jump down from your horse and fight with me for 300 rounds." Zhang Xiaohua was a little angry when she heard the disciple calling her me. She smiled and said, "There is no need for 300 rounds. I want to knock your sword down in 30 rounds. The disciple was even angrier and shouted, "That's good. If you can't knock my sword down, quickly kowtow to me 3 times and run down the mountain." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, "What if I knock it down? Then I will kowtow to you." The disciple blurted out, "Good." Zhang Xiaohua said loudly, "Senior brothers, you have to be a witness. Don't bully me with your numbers." After he finished speaking, his right wrist flicked and the iron lotus seed that he had just caught flew out. Before the disciple could react, it hit the hilt of the long sword. A huge force came and the disciple felt as if he was struck by lightning. His right hand couldn't help but loosen. The long sword flew out of his hand and brushed past the disciple's cheek. With a dang sound, it hit a big tree on the side of the road. Not only was that disciple shocked, but the disciple beside him also turned pale and couldn't help but take a step back. The other disciples also immediately spread out and surrounded Zhang Xiaohua. Seeing the actions of these disciples, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "What? Are you really going to bully me with numbers? Why did you launch a sneak attack without even drawing your sword?" That disciple said angrily. Zhang Xiaohua looked at him and let out a long laugh. "Which eye of yours saw a sword on my body? Besides, did I tell you that I used my sword to knock your sword down?" -3. Chapter 7:15. Looking at the disciple's changing face, Zhang Xiaohua educated him again. "Besides, I have already made an appointment with you. Are you waiting for me to start? If I were to sneak attack, what would you call it just now?" The disciple was speechless. He waved his hand and said, "Fellow brothers of the Misty Hall, the little medicine boy of the pill expanding hall from the fragrant school is bullying people in our Serene Peak. This is unbearable. We can't let him bully us." Then, he said to Zhang Xiaohua, "Come on, little medicine boy. Let this young master see what you are capable of." After that, he turned to the disciples and said, "Go, Let the pill-expanding school see our misty halls. Hearing this, the disciples at the side were all eager to give it a try. They held their long swords and were about to rush forward. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua leaped down from his horse. Without waiting for the disciple to finish his words, he rushed in front of him and waved his left hand. Slap, slap, slap. He gave the disciple 2 tight slaps on the face. Then, he grabbed the disciple's neck as if he was holding a chick. Looking at the disciple's face gradually turning red and his eyes bulging, Zhang Xiaohua said disdainfully, I have heard the senior brothers in the hall talk about the Misty School and the deeds of the Misty School's disciples. So, I have always looked forward to the disciples of the Misty School. I think they are the real men of the Jianghu. Similarly, I also thought that the disciples of the Misty Hall are heroes. But now, it seems that they are nothing more than this. You are unworthy of the name Misty. Look at what you have become now. Using hidden weapons to attack an unknown disciple from the dark. You don't care if the disciple knows martial arts or not. You want to bet with him when you fail. You want to gang up on him when you lose the bet. What kind of behavior is this? It is the lowly behavior of the Jianghu. A decent man of the Jianghu would never do this. Do you think that with what you have done today, you are worthy of the name Misty? Are you worthy of the seniors of the Misty School who defended the name Misty? Then, she sighed and said, Forget it, forget it. The Misty Hall is nothing more than this. She shook her hand and the disciple was easily thrown to the ground. He could only gasp for breath and couldn't get up for a long time. This group of young disciples, when they were 12 or 13 years old, had encountered the great change in the Misty School. They didn't have time to break out with the other disciples and were captured by the Righteous Alliance and the other 2 factions. During this time, they had seen many of their senior brothers being killed. They had long regarded the disciples of the 3 factions as their enemies. Even now, in the Misty School, their hearts were still restless. Whenever they had the chance, they would take the disciples of the other factions who were on duty at Shishine Peak. They didn't care if these disciples knew martial arts or not. After a long time, they had already gotten used to it. How could they still care about the morals of the Jianghu and basic etiquette? Now that Zhang Xiaohua had said those words, their expressions changed. It was unknown whether it was because they felt ashamed, or because they were shocked by Zhang Xiaohua's strength. Most of their eyes flickered, not daring to meet Zhang Xiaohua's gaze. There were also a few who held their swords, eager to fight. However, no one dared to make the first move. In a moment of urgency, they didn't dare to step forward. Seeing the reaction of the disciples, Zhang Xiaohua secretly nodded. She couldn't expect all the disciples to be reasonable. Most of them could listen to unpleasant words. The Misty Hall was still the Misty School of the past. The disciple who was thrown to the ground by Zhang Xiaohua was even more embarrassed. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's tall and thin figure and somewhat childish face, he gritted his teeth and went forward to kneel down. How could Zhang Xiaohua let him kneel down? She immediately pulled him back and smiled. Senior brother, what do you want to do? It's not a festive occasion. I don't have any copper coins to give. The disciple struggled hard but couldn't move an inch. He was even more surprised. He smiled bitterly and said, I am Lu Qiaogang of the Misty Hall. This junior brother's teaching is very right. Let's not talk about the previous hidden weapon. Since I have lost the bet, I have to kowtow. This, Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. She was just casually talking about her disappointment towards the disciples of the Misty Hall. She didn't expect that it would enlighten them. If this disciple really kowtowed to her, if they knew her identity, then wouldn't she? After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, The bet is a bet. Logically speaking, you should kneel to me. However, a man should not kneel down. I think you just casually said the conditions of the bet and fell into my trap. I am also in the wrong. If you feel that you are in the wrong today, then return to the Misty Hall and kowtow to the seniors in your hall. It was Lu Qiaogang's turn to hesitate. When it came to kneeling, his blood had rushed to his head, and he wanted to kneel. Now that he was slightly sober, he knew that if he kneeled, it would make him look noble. However, it would also make him lose face. It would be a huge loss of face. When he returned to the hall, people would talk about the reason. Those who knew would say that he was in the wrong and kept his promise. But what about those who didn't know? They would definitely say that he was a coward. Sigh. Lu Xiaogang sighed. It is difficult to be a true hero. Then, he borrowed the ladder and came down. He cupped his hands and said, Senior Ren, you are magnanimous. You are the role model of my generation. Thank you for your guidance today. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, You are too kind. In the future, I will have to live with the support of the disciples of the Misty Hall. We will understand and support each other. At this moment, Lu Xiaogang thought of the reason why Zhang Xiaohua came to Serene Peak. He smiled and said, Senior Ren, please wait for a moment. After he finished speaking, he took out a signal and prepared to report to Serene Peak. When the disciples saw that the two of them had turned hostility into friendship, they were happy. A few of them came over and greeted Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua returned their greetings and said a few words. Then, she asked, By the way, I heard that there is a disciple called Zhang Xiaohu in your hall. How is he doing now? Zhang Xiaohu? When the disciples heard this name, their expressions changed greatly, and their expressions became strange. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she couldn't help but wonder, is there no such disciple? Or did something happen to Zhang Xiaohu? A disciple blinked and asked curiously, Senior Ren, how do you know Senior Zhang's name? Zhang Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, This one also participated in the Yulan Dusk refinement. It was your hall's senior brother Zhang Xiaohu who rescued this one from the Yulan Grand Canyon. You are the disciple of the pill-expanding hall that Senior Zhang rescued? A few disciples said in disbelief, Senior Ren's martial arts seems to be higher than Senior Zhang's. How could he be rescued by him? Haha, I was seriously injured at that time. If not for Senior Zhang's help, I would have been buried in the stomach of a beast. Then, she asked, Is Senior Zhang in Serene Peak now? What happened? The disciples hesitated and said, Senior Zhang is indeed in Serene Peak. But after a long time, they couldn't say anything. Zhang Xiaohua was anxious and was about to urge them. At this time, Lu Xiaogang had already set up the signal. He waved his hand, and a whistling arrow flew into the air. Then, he said with a smile, Senior Ren, wait a moment. There will be a senior brother coming to pick you up. Zhang Xiaohua didn't care who came to pick him up. She just asked, What happened to Senior Zhang? Lu Xiaogang smiled bitterly. I can't tell you. But Senior Zhang's situation is not good. I also heard it from others. I didn't see it myself. Zhang Xiaohua's heart thumped. She was about to ask when she saw a colorful signal flying from the direction that Zhang Xiaohua came from. It was similar to the signal of the inner disciples that Zhang Xiaohua saw in the Yulan Grand Canyon. Lu Xiaogang was shocked and shouted, The signal of an inner disciple? Could it be that an inner disciple came to Serene Peak to ask about the Yulan Grand Canyon? Quickly go down the mountain to pick him up. Before the voice fell, there was a rush of horse hooves from the mountain road. Everyone looked up and saw several horses galloping down from Serene Peak. The first one was a 25 or 26 years old disciple. When he came close, he saw Zhang Xiaohua and frowned. He turned his head and asked, Junior Brother Lu, why did you send the signal of our sect? Lu Xiaogang stepped forward and said, Senior Brother Ding, this senior brother is the disciple on duty sent by the pill-expanding hall of Baiyue Peak. I'll inform the senior brothers on the mountain to find someone to pick him up. Senior Brother Ding was obviously surprised. He looked at Zhang Xiaohua with an unfriendly look and said, How can I have time to pick him up? Didn't you see that the inner disciples are all at the foot of the mountain? You just have to look at him here. At this moment, the hall masters must be ready to welcome the inner disciples and have no time to pay attention to him. Anyway, he just has to go up the mountain. When the inner disciples come up the mountain, let him follow them. Seeing that this senior brother was disrespectful to Zhang Xiaohua, Lu Xiaogang was afraid that Zhang Xiaohua would get angry and attack him. He looked at Zhang Xiaohua with some apprehension. Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, It doesn't matter. It's important to welcome the inner disciples. I'll wait here. While they were talking, the horns sounded loudly on the mountain peak, and then several tall horses came down the mountain. Senior fellow apprentice Ding did not dare to delay and said, Forget it, Junior Fellow Apprentice Liu, come with me. You don't have to wait anymore. Deputy Hall Master Zhong and Deputy Hall Master Qin have also come down the mountain. Let's hurry to the front to welcome the inner disciples. After that, the group of disciples left Zhang Xiaohua aside and rode down the mountain. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the dust and could not help but smile bitterly. She wanted to ask someone about second brother, but it seemed that she should forget it. She would see him in a while. Whether he was good or bad, she would know. While she was thinking, the people from the mountain had already approached. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly pulled the big black horse and Huan, who liked to walk in the middle of the road, aside. Several big horses galloped on the road. Suddenly, a woman's exclamation came from the left hand of the horse that was very close to Zhang Xiaohua. Hey! When Zhang Xiaohua looked, it was a woman in black sitting on the horse. Her eyes were fixed on her, and there was a trace of surprise in her eyes. -3. Chapter 7:16. Zhang Xiaohua was also taken aback, following which, he was overjoyed. There was no need to look at this woman's face. Just by looking at her waist, which was as thick as a bucket, and that extremely pleasant voice, he knew that this was an old friend of Misty sect, Aunt Qin. Zhang Xiaohua then realized that Lu Qiaogang had mentioned Deputy Hall Leader Qin from the Misty Hall. She must be the former Hall Leader Qin from the Misty School's Mingcue Hall. However, when she heard Aunt Qin's Zhang Xiaohua didn't know if she was surprised because she had heard about her from Chang'e and saw her here, or because she was surprised to see a similar face from a few years ago in the Chuanqiang cult. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua didn't know if she should greet her. While she was hesitating, Aunt Qin also withdrew her gaze and brushed past the other people. The other people also looked at Zhang Xiaohua strangely, but didn't stop to ask. After that, the entire mountain path returned to its usual tranquility, and no one came over. Zhang Xiaohua had to pull the big black horse and the 4 odd beasts to the side of the mountain path obediently, waiting for the inner core disciples of the Lingxiang Peak to go together. After the time it took to eat a meal, the sound of galloping horses could be heard from the foot of the mountain. Looking up, it was the group of young disciples who had been with Lu Qiao. They rode past in a hurry, not even sparing Zhang Xiaohua a glance. In such a hurry? Zhang Xiaohua shrugged. I thought it was the inner core disciples who came up. After a while, there was another sound of horse hooves. This time, it was still a few young disciples who came over, but also hurriedly left. Zhang Xiaohua was a little disdainful. Why is that? Why don't they go up together? Can't they save money by going up separately? However, after a while, Lu Qiaogang and the others appeared again, which made Zhang Xiaohua dumbfounded. Even if he was ignorant, he seemed to know that this was definitely not as simple as saving money. This seemed to be a kind of etiquette, right? Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua was still in a daze, Lu Qiaogang shouted, Senior Apprentice Brother Run. After the inner sanctum messengers are over, you can just follow behind the carriages. After he finished speaking, he spurred his horse and left. Zhang Xiaohua opened her mouth and swallowed the words she wanted to ask. Then, several groups of disciples walked past Zhang Xiaohua. Only then did she see the inner court emissary walking slowly from the foot of the mountain. This was a simple caravan. At the front, there were a few young disciples riding pure white horses. At the back, there were a few female disciples with their faces covered. They also looked quite young. In the middle, there was a girl in green clothes. She was wearing a veil, so her face could not be seen. She rode a large red horse, like a moon surrounded by stars. Behind the girl, there was an exquisite carriage that slowly followed behind the caravan. Currently, Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense could only reach 10 feet, and could not see through that disciple's veil. Of course, what kind of person was our Zhang Xiaohua? She was a magnanimous man, so how could she do such a thing without telling? Cough cough. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua carefully hid at the side of the road and waited for the caravan to pass. In this caravan, on both sides of the inner court emissary, there were Misty Hall's Deputy Hall Master Qin and Deputy Hall Master Zhong accompanying them. They were pointing at the side of the mountain path and talking about something. When Aunt Qin saw Zhang Xiaohua in front, she unconsciously looked at her a few times and secretly said, This person looks very familiar. Why can't I remember? It seems that other than the Misty School's disciples, I don't know anyone else in the fragrant religion. Could she be one of the Misty School's disciples? That can't be right. This young person is only in her teens. Back then, she was even younger. How could she be one of the Misty School's disciples? Back then, could it be? I remember now. She looks very similar to Zhang Xiaohu's younger brother. She should be called Zhang Xiaohua. What a pity, that child. While Aunt Qin's imagination was running wild, the inner court emissary in green also saw Zhang Xiaohua and unconsciously blurted out, Ren Xiaoyao. From her tone, there was a hint of joy. Hearing this, Aunt Qin smiled apologetically and said, Emissary Chun, do you see someone you know? Hee, yes. Deputy Hall Master Qin. Don't you see the young disciple in front of us? He's a little medicine boy from the pill hall and entered the fragrant religion a few months ago. After saying this, she shut her mouth. It was better not to tell the Misty Hall about the fragrant religion. Moreover, she was an inner court emissary. How could she answer every question? Hearing this, Aunt Qin didn't mind and smiled. Should I call him over? The woman in green thought for a while and nodded. I'll have to trouble Deputy Hall Master Qin to ask him what he's doing at Shixin Peak. Aunt Qin nodded and urged her horse forward, stopping in front of Zhang Xiaohua. Seeing Aunt Qin coming over, Zhang Xiaohua was very happy. When she was about to salute, she heard Aunt Qin say, Are you Ren Xiaoyao, a disciple of the pill hall? Zhang Xiaohua was startled and smiled apologetically. Yes, I am. May I know? You're a disciple of the pill hall. Why are you here at Shixin Peak? What's the matter? Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua knew that Aunt Qin didn't recognize her, so she took out the token of the pill hall and gave it to Aunt Qin. She briefly explained the whole story. Hearing this, Aunt Qin nodded and carefully looked at the token. Then she put the silk in her arms and returned the token to Zhang Xiaohua, saying, Please wait a moment. She was about to turn around when she turned back and asked, Do you know Lord Chun of the Inner Court? Lord Chun? Then she realized that it was the gossipy Chun Chen. She nodded and said, I've met him a few times, including Lord Kong. Aunt Qin thought for a while and got up to greet the approaching carriages. Then she reported the matter to Chen Chen. Chen Chen smiled and said, That's good. Let him come over, and we can go up the mountain together. Hearing this, Deputy Hall Chief Zhong hurriedly stopped her and said, Lord Qin, the disciple on duty of the pill hall is just an ordinary disciple. It's always the ordinary disciples of the Misty Hall who welcome him. If he goes with Lord Chun, won't he? Chen Chun was wearing a veil, so no one could see the change of expression on her face. She snorted and said, Deputy Hall Chief Zhong, do you still want to meddle in my affairs? Even if I let him ride my horse, it's none of your business. Zhong Pei blushed and smiled apologetically. I just think it's a little inappropriate. It'll damage the identity of the inner court disciple of the Lingxiang Peak. Inner court disciple? Chen Chen chuckled and said, Deputy Hall Chief Zhong is now the Deputy Hall Chief of the Misty Hall. Let's talk about the identity of inner court disciple in the future. Hearing this, Aunt Qin felt happy and bowed. She said, Then should I call Ren Xiaoyao over? Chen Chen waved her hand and motioned her to hurry up, but she didn't say anything else. Zhang Xiaohua was not surprised to hear that Chen Chun called her. Chen Chun was a gossipy girl. It would be strange if she didn't call her over when she saw her and asked her to tell her what happened in the pill hall. So Zhang Xiaohua pretended that she didn't know and walked to Chen Chen's horse in a panic. She bowed to the ground and asked, I'm Ren Xiaoyao of the pill hall. Greetings to the inner court emissary. May I know why you call me here? Hearing this, Chen Chen was amused and said in a low voice, I just heard from Deputy Hall Chief Qin of the Misty Hall that you're the disciple on duty of the pill hall this time. So I call you here and go up the mountain with me. Hearing that Chen Chen used a fake voice, Zhang Xiaohua had already complained in her heart. As I said, Chen Chen is not a quiet person. She won't stop until she does something strange. Zhang Xiaohua looked panicked and waved her hand quickly. I don't dare. I'm just a little pharmacist of the pill hall. How can I be qualified to walk beside you? Chen Chen laughed in her heart and said in a slightly hoarse voice, Don't talk nonsense. Just come here. Believe it or not, I'll ask Elder Purple Herb to whip you 30 times. Zhang Xiaohua shrank her neck and looked scared. She jumped on the black horse next to her and walked behind Chen Chen's horse. Qinshin looked around and frowned. She whispered, "Well, Deputy Hall Chief Zhong, can you walk behind me? Ask the pharmacist of the pill hall to come here. I want to ask about the pill hall." Well, seeing that Qinshin suddenly changed her voice, Zhong Pei felt very strange. Hearing her words, he was even more puzzled. What's there to ask about the pill hall? Don't you want to ask about the Misty Hall? His Excellency asked me to care more about the lives of ordinary disciples and give them more care. Isn't that right? Do you want to question the wise decision of His Excellency? Zhong Pei was sweating. He quickly reined in the horse and walked behind Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua walked to Chen Shun with a bitter face and bowed. "What can I do for you?" Ahem, ahem. Chen Shun coughed and pretended to say, "Tell me what you've done in the pill hall in the past few months." Zhang Xiaohua had already burst into laughter. "Tell me what you've done in the pill hall in the past few months?" It was obvious that Chen Shun knew that she had just come to the fragrance cult a few months ago. She knew that the messenger Chen in front of her should be the original Lord Chen. Zhang Xiaohua had ears. How could she not hear the messenger Chen mentioned by Deputy Hall Chief Zhong? However, Chen Shun thought that he had concealed it well. His fake voice was a hymn, as real as a real one. Putting aside the fact that Chen Shun somewhat looked down on ordinary disciples, Zhang Xiaohua was still pleasing to the eye in other aspects. At this time, he had found his second brother and no longer had to suck up to Chen Shun, but he was also willing to tell Messenger Chen about the interesting things of the pill-expanding hall. So, Zhang Xiaohua rode beside Chen Shun and told him about what had happened in the pill hall and the gambling on Tianmu Peak. Chen Chen was so fascinated that he almost wanted to fight on behalf of Zhang Xiaohua. He unconsciously revealed his original voice and complained, "Ren Xiaoyao, why do you have all the good things? You've held the hand of the beautiful girl in the Rejuvenation Valley and got engaged. Even in the fragrance cult, you can meet such interesting things. God, what can I say about you? You can be an inner disciple, and I'll go to the pill hall." "You?" Zhang Xiaohua pretended to be surprised and almost fell off the horse. She pointed at Chen Chen's veil and said, Who are you?" -3. Chapter 717. Chen Shun accidentally revealed his true face and was regretting it. However, when he saw Zhang Xiaohua almost falling off the horse, he couldn't help but feel happy. After lying for a long time, wasn't this a happy moment? Chen Shun was so happy that he swayed back and forth and laughed heartily. There was no trace of the majesty of the inner disciple just now. Not only Aunt Qin and Zhong Pei, but even the few inner sect disciples accompanying them had faces full of astonishment. After Chen Shun finished laughing, he sat up straight again and coughed twice. His voice was as calm as usual as he said, "Well, Ren Xiaoyao, you're very good. Your martial arts are good, and you get along well with the disciples of the pill-toppling hall. You can be considered an excellent talent. If there's a chance in the future, I'll put in a good word for you in front of the sect master." As soon as he said that, everyone around him was filled with admiration. Zhong Pei was even more jealous. What kind of relationship was this? Just fooling a few burly men from Tianmu Peak and exchanging a few stalks of herbs for their pills, and that was it? Then what had they done all these years? Wasn't it better than what they had done in the past few days? Was this the legendary having connections in the court makes it easier to be an official? Zhang Xiaohua looked surprised and repeatedly cupped her hands at Chen Chen. She said, "So it's Chen. Lord, I was wondering which inner disciple was so approachable and amiable as usual, making me feel like bathing in the spring breeze. Since it's Lord Chen, it's really not strange. Oh, by the way, Lord Kong, Lord Xia, how are they?" Chen Chen beamed with joy. Good, very good. It's just that you can't go to Lingxiang Peak. Otherwise, I'll take you to see them." Aunt Qin, Zhong Pei, and the other disciples' jaws dropped to the ground. This inconspicuous little medicine boy of the pill-toppling hall even knew Peacock and Xiaqing. Could this guy be a relative of the sect master? Then, Chen Shun felt a little strange and asked, "But according to what you said, you went to Tianmu Peak as soon as you arrived at the pill-toppling hall. You didn't even see Elder Zishan. How could he know you? And he even let you be a disciple on duty at Shixin Peak?" Then he looked at Aunt Qin and smiled. "The Misty Hall is famous for its unity. The disciples on duty in the other halls have suffered a lot in their hands. Your martial arts might be good, but you've only been in the fragrant cult for a few months. You don't know anything. How can you succeed? Zhang Xiaohua pondered for a moment. It was not a secret that she had participated in the Yulon Dusk refinement. That day at the exit of the Yulon Grand Canyon, Qinshin only cared about running away and did not see her. Otherwise, he would not be here listening to her. She just had to talk about the unimportant things. Thus, he cleared his throat and said, "About this, it is because this little one participated in the Orchid Evening refinement and accumulated a little merit." Twilight Orchid refinement. Chun Chun was shocked and pointed at Zhang Xiaohua. You also participated? Why didn't I see you? And you actually made it out alive." Then she realized, "Are you the disciple of the Tuodin Hall saved by the disciple of the Misty Hall?" Zhang Xiaohua touched her nose and said with a wry smile, replying to Lord Chun, "It is this little one." This little one relied on Senior Zhang Xiaohu of the Misty Hall to escape from the Yulon Grand Canyon. Zhong Pei's face was extremely ugly, and he wanted to say something but stopped. Chun Chin's interest was piqued, and she quickly said, "Quick, tell me about it." Zhong Pei quickly stepped forward and said, "Reporting to Envoy Chun, it's getting late. Let's hurry up. Hallmaster Yang is still waiting for Envoy Chun on the mountain." Qinshin casually looked at the mountain path and said, "Am I not going up the mountain? You don't have to say more." Zhong Pei was rebuffed and had to follow behind. Beside him, Aunt Qin was happy and also slowed down her pace, thinking that the mountain path was getting longer and longer. Zhang Xiaohua was well aware of Chun Chin's character, so he told him about the thrilling experience he had in the Valley Orchid Dusk. Of course, he did not mention anything about Deputy Hall Master Su and Lu Lihong. He only said that he had made a mistake and the Hall Master wanted him to pick the ice soul grass. When he heard that Zhang Xiaohua saw him at the exit of the Yulon Grand Canyon and that he was running in the front, and that Zhang Xiaohua sacrificed herself to lead the Yellow Wind to Lu Chaoxian and the other disciples out of danger, he could not help but be silent. After a long while, he stretched out his jade-like hand and patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and said in a low voice, "Ren Xiaoyao, you are really good. I didn't expect you to be so benevolent." Zhang Xiaohua was sweating profusely. That jade-like hand patting his shoulder was a little mushy. He could only smile apologetically and say, "I don't know why I was so hot-blooded that day. Maybe it's because the feelings between men are different. I couldn't bear to see them lose their lives. Now that I think about it, I'm scared. Also, did Lord Chun have other important matters to attend to that you couldn't care about other things?" Qin Shun was stunned, and then his voice became a little louder. He found a reason to be at ease and said, "Yes, you are right. If I didn't have to protect junior sister Zixia, how could I be in such a difficult situation?" "Zixia?" Zhang Xiaohua nodded. She guessed that it was the woman in purple who was holding Chun Chin's hand that day. Then Zhang Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, "That's right. I think with Lord Chin's chivalry, if it wasn't an urgent matter, he wouldn't have to be like this." "That's right." Qin Shen echoed unwillingly. But then she felt strange and said, "But that yellow wind was unusually brave. It was like the wind. How could you escape with your life?" Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua exerted his strength. His face suddenly turned pale and he looked frightened. He said in a trembling voice, "Lord Chun, please don't mention it. Speaking of this, I'm just scared. What on earth was that thing that was like the wind? I still don't know. You don't know that when I ran in front, it chased after me. It disappeared for a while and then appeared again. At first, my neck was cut by it. You see, after that, he was about to show his neck." Qin Shun couldn't look at his neck. He waved his hand and said, "Then, what happened later?" "Later, I don't know what happened. That thing slowed down a little. But then I didn't know where I ran to. I saw a very deep cliff, and then I heard a cry that resounded through the sky. Then I felt a pain in the back of my head and fainted. I guess I was killed by that thing." Qin Shan was also surprised. Knowing that Zhang Xiaohua was in front of him, he also shouted, "Why did the yellow wind come from the back of your head? Didn't it tear the throat?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "Lord Chun, I don't know. At that time, I didn't care about anything and tried my best to run to a place with many trees. I was afraid that thing would catch up with me. Now that I think about it, it was because I ran into the valley that the thing was afraid that someone would come out from the exit, so it hesitated. Or perhaps there was something wrong with that thing, so it slowed down the more it chased me. In the end, it knocked me out. Perhaps it thought that I was already dead. Chun Shun was thoughtful, but Zhang Xiaohua was nervous. He didn't know if this lie could be deceived by Chen Chen. After a long while, Chen Chen asked again, Ren Xiaoyao, can you tell me what happened after you met Zhang Xiaohu? Zhong Pei, who was at the side, couldn't help but want to remind him. However, after patting his horse and taking 2 steps forward, he stopped. Nonsense. You've repeatedly disturbed the inner court emissary's observation of the people's situation. Isn't it obvious that you have a guilty conscience? Zhang Xiaohua was also stunned and secretly said, What's there to say? Isn't it all a story made up with second brother and second sister-in-law? Could it be that the people of Lingxiang Peak saw something wrong? After thinking for a while, he cleared his throat and told the story that he had discussed with Zhang Xiaohu one by one. Even the matter of saving the inner disciple was put on Zhang Xiaohu. Of course, in the middle of the story, Zhang Xiaohua did not forget to praise herself. Lord Chun, the inner disciple's bones were all set by me. If there's any merit, don't forget me. I don't dare to share with senior brother Zhang Xiaohu. I'll just give a little reward. As he said, he stretched out his little finger and gestured the size of a fingertip. Qinshin laughed out loud and said, If you didn't tell me, I really wouldn't know. When I have the chance, I'll definitely report this matter to the sect master. Then he asked, Where did you learn the technique of setting bones? Zhang Xiaohua was surprised and said, Lord Chun, don't you know? I came from Rejuvenation Valley. The medical skills of Rejuvenation Valley are also famous in Jianghu. Isn't that so? Chen patted his forehead and said, I really forgot about this. Then, Zhang Xiaohua followed up with a casual look. Lord Qin, why have you come to the ethereal hall today? Is it to reward senior brother Zhang for saving the inner disciple? The corners of Qian Qin's mouth under the veil curled up and he said with a smile, How can you know the whereabouts of the inner disciple? Then, he looked at the disciples of Serene Peak who were already in sight and said with a smile, Let's go. You're just in time. Follow me and you'll know. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry and secretly complained, Isn't it just an inner disciple? What's so great about it? I, Xiaoxia, have been talking all the way and my mouth is dry. Can't I let you say a word? Hee, if it weren't for my second brother's reputation, I, Xiaoxia, would be too lazy to talk to you. Although he thought so, his mouth was tight and he said modestly, I'll listen to Lord Qin's orders. In front of Lord Qin, I'm willing to lead the horse and serve you faithfully. Qinshin laughed again and said, Forget it. I don't need you to do this. Just watch from the side. On Shixin Peak, Yang Rupiang and Hall Master Yang had been waiting anxiously for a long time. After several waves of disciples came up to report, there was no news, which made her very anxious. Although there would be no accidents on the mountain road of Shixin Peak, she was a little confused because she hadn't come up for a long time. Yang Rupiang was not relieved until she saw the figures of the crowd. But even so, Chen Qian and others still went up the mountain slowly, which made her frown and her heart moved for no reason. Is this a show of strength from His Excellency? I don't know which junior sister this messenger is. I only heard that her surname is Chen. I don't know if she is easy to get along with. -3. Chapter 718. By the time Qinshin saw Yang Rupiang, Zhang Xiaohua's story had also ended. Qinshin did not delay any further. He spurred his maroon horse and rushed out of the crowd. When Yang Rupiang saw this, she hurriedly came out to greet him. When the two of them got closer, Qinshin dismounted from his horse and took out a fist-sized jade talisman. He held it high and said, I've come to Shixin Peak on the orders of the sect leader to settle the dispute between Hall Master Yang Rupiang and Vice Hall Master Zhong Pei. Yang Rupiang bowed and said, Thank you for your concern, sect master. Then, Chun Shun handed over the jade talisman and said with a smile, Senior Sister Yang, please tell me your identity. Hearing Chun Shun call her Senior Sister Yang, Yang Rupiang was relieved. According to the rules, she was the hall master of the Misty Hall, so Chen should call her Hall Master Yang. Now, he called her Senior Sister Yang in front of her, which meant that they were close. So, she took the jade talisman and looked at it carefully. Then, she handed it back and said with a smile, "Welcome to Serene Peak, Junior Sister Chun. Thank you for your hard work." Chen took the jade talisman and put it in his arms. He shook his head and said, "It's not hard work. I'm just helping Sect Master. I've heard of your name for a long time, but I didn't have the chance to meet you. Now, seeing you in person is better than hearing about you." Yang Rupiang smiled bitterly and said, "What do you mean by famous? I'm very stupid and I'm not good at dealing with the affairs of the hall. Sect Master put the Misty Hall in my hands, but I caused so much trouble and troubled Sect Master. Junior Sister, please don't laugh at me." Haha. Chen stopped talking. At this time, Aunt Qin, Zhong Pei, and the others also approached. Zhang Xiaohua pretended to be young among the inner disciples, so they couldn't see anything special about her. Yang Rupiang glanced at the crowd and said to Chen, "Junior Sister Chen, do you want to take a rest now or ask the questions directly?" Chen looked at the many disciples standing solemnly behind Yang Rupiang and nodded. "There's no need to rest. Let's just ask them directly. This has dragged on for many days. I'm sure that Zhang Xiaohu, Chang'e, and Chen must have suffered a lot. Please call them here, Hall Master Yang." When he mentioned the name Chen, there was a hint of excitement in his tone, which made Yang Rupiang a little confused. When Zhang Xiaohua, who was in the crowd, heard this, he felt his head explode. What? Zhang Xiaohu was wronged. What's going on? Second brother brought back 4 carriages worth of spirit grass and even saved a female inner sect disciple. How could he get into trouble? Zhang Xiaohua looked around, the corner of his eyes twitching slightly and his teeth grinding. At this time, he also thought of the scene when he met Lu Chaogang on the mountain road. Presumably, all the disciples of the Misty Hall knew what was going on. Who can tell me what happened? Zhang Xiaohua shouted in her heart. At this moment, Yang Rupiang asked, "Yes, Emissary Chun. Where would you like to ask?" "Ethereal Hall," Chen said indifferently. "Emissary, please follow me." With that, Yang Rupiang led the way and led Chen inside. The younger disciples of the inner sect also followed Chen. Zhang Xiaohua mingled in the crowd. After a moment of hesitation, he followed as well. Chen did not ask him to go out. He wanted to see what happened to his second brother. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua was not in the mood to look at the scenery of Serene Peak. She just followed the disciples and was puzzled. What happened to second brother? Not long after, everyone came to the Ethereal Hall. Although the Ethereal Hall was big, it could not accommodate everyone. Chen looked back and pointed. You, and you, come in with me." After that, he stepped into the Ethereal Hall. Among these people, Zhang Xiaohua was among them. Zhang Xiaohua did not understand why Chen called her in, but this was exactly what she wanted. She quietly followed the crowd into the Ethereal Hall. Needless to say, there were rules about who could enter the Ethereal Hall and who could not. After the disciples of Lingxiang Peak went in, the others also went in and stood in their own positions. Zhang Xiaohua, who entered the Ethereal Hall for the first time, was stunned. The decoration of the Ethereal Hall was almost the same as the meeting room of the Misty School. Even the position of the torches and candles were the same. At first glance, she thought she was back in the Misty Heights. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua nodded inwardly. Hall Master Yang really has deep feelings for Master Openg. I admire him. Chen was the envoy of His Excellency, so naturally, he was the chief. The disciples of Lingering Fragrance Peak and Zhang Xiaohua stood on both sides of Chen. Yang Rupiang and Aunt Qin sat on the lower left side, while Zhong Pei sat on the lower right side. After everyone had taken their seats, Chen said, "Disciples of Misty Hall, His Excellency has known about your report on Lingering Fragrance Peak since the earliest time. But now the sect is not peaceful and there are more important things happening in other peaks, so it has been postponed again and again. This time, His Excellency has taken time out of his busy schedule to pay attention to our Serene Peak and sent me as an envoy to investigate your report." Then, he said to Yang Rupiang, "Hall Master Yang, please escort Zhang Xiaohu, Chang'e, and Chen to the front of the hall." Escort to the front of the hall? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned again. She was slightly angry and thought, are they already considered prisoners? Why use the word escort? Yang Rupiang bowed and said, Chang'e and Chen Shun are female disciples and have not been tortured to extort a confession. It's okay to call them up, but Zhang Xiaohu, as she said, she looked at Zhong Pei. Zhong Pei hurriedly got up and said with a smile, Messenger Chun, I took over this matter from the beginning. I know it's of great importance and concerns the lives of thousands of disciples in the sect, so I dare not be careless. However, Zhang Xiaohu refused to say anything, so I had to use some punishment. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, his mind buzzed again. He was furious in his heart. His eyes were round as he stared straight at Zhong Pei. This ignorant man, he actually dared to torture second brother. He must be tired of living. Qin Shen waved his hand and said, it doesn't matter. Punishment is a necessary means. You just need to send Zhang Xiaohu to the front of the hall. Hearing that Qin Shen did not mean to blame him, Zhong Pei was overjoyed. He waved to the law enforcement disciples behind him and said, go and bring Zhang Xiaohu here. The law enforcement disciples behind him hesitated for a moment and bowed to take the order. Not long after, a stretcher carried Zhang Xiaohu, who was covered in blood and bruises and whose breathing was a little weak. Zhang Xiaohua, who was standing in the crowd, stared at the stretcher as soon as it appeared. Her eyes were faintly filled with tears. When she saw her second brother's miserable condition, she almost exploded. However, when her divine sense swept over Zhang Xiaohu, she found that her second brother was still alive and not in danger. Only then did she force herself to restrain herself and see what Qin Chun was looking for. At this time, Chang'e and the other Qin Chun were also brought to the front of the hall. As soon as Chang'e saw Zhang Xiaohu, he no longer cared about etiquette and rules. He rushed forward in a few steps and wanted to hug Zhang Xiaohu. However, he was covered with wounds and did not dare to do so for fear of hurting Zhang Xiaohu. He only held the bamboo pole of the stretcher tightly with his hands. His tears had already dripped onto Zhang Xiaohu's body. Chen Shun also hesitated for a moment before following behind Chang'e. Her tears fell as she cried, Senior brother, you can't die. When Chang'e heard this, his heart ached as if he had returned to the wilderness surrounded by blood wolves. He clenched his teeth and fiercely glared at Zhong Pei. Then, he looked at the masked woman sitting in front of the hall. How could he not know that she was an inner disciple of Lingering Fragrance Peak? He walked forward and knelt in front of the high and mighty Qin Shen. He said, Senior brother Zhang is innocent. Zhao Jian is the main culprit. When the masked Qin Shen saw this, she said in a deep voice, Stand up. Regardless of whether your senior brother Zhang is innocent or not, you have to remember that in the Lingering Fragrance sect, female disciples are respected. You don't need to kneel to anyone except the sect leader. When Chang'e heard this, he hesitated for a moment before slowly standing up. Zhao Jian? The masked Qin Shen asked, Where is he? This lowly one is here. Zhao Jian walked out from behind Zhong Pei and bowed towards the seat of honor. And Qin Shen didn't comment. Then, she stood up and walked to Zhang Xiaohu. She stretched out her hand and gently touched Zhang Xiaohu's pulse. After checking, she sighed and said, His meridians are damaged, but his martial arts are not damaged. However, his internal injuries are very serious. Many of his bones are broken, and there are many external injuries. His life is not in danger, but he will need a long time to recover. After speaking, she took out a jade bottle and handed it to Chang'e. This is Lingering Fragrance Peak's Yuandan pill. Feed him one. I have something to ask him. Chang'e accepted the bottle and fed the Yuandan pill into Zhang Xiaohu's mouth. The masked Qin Shen looked at Zhong Pei's face and said, Deputy Hall Master Zhong, you don't have to do this. The truth is not out yet. I just want to wake Zhang Xiaohu up and ask him the reason. Then, she sat back in her chair and stretched out her right hand. She hooked her right index finger and said to Qin Shen, who had just stopped crying, Are you Qin Shen? Come up and talk. Qin Shen looked at Chang'e, who was busy feeding Zhang Xiaohu the pill, and timidly walked forward. He bowed and said, Disciple Qin Shen greets your excellency. You don't have to be so polite, Qin Shen. The masked Qin Shen nodded and said, Tell me everything that happened in the Yulan Canyon. Then, he added, Don't be afraid. It'll be fine as long as you tell me the truth, Chen. It was very easy to call him Chen. Chen looked back at Chang'e and started to talk about the disciples of the Misty Hall, from entering the Yulan Canyon to encountering the blood wolves and the two inexplicable neighs of the horses. Chen is lying. Your Excellency, Chen must have colluded with Chang'e and Zhang Xiaohu. Zhao Jian couldn't bear it anymore and stepped forward to defend himself. Shut up. Who are you to call Chen? The masked Chen was furious. Didn't you see that Your Excellency is asking a question? What right do you have to speak? -3. Chapter 719. Although Zhao Jian did not understand the meaning of Chen is also for you to call, he knew the anger of the messenger from Lingxiang Peak. He quickly shrank his head and retreated. The masked Chen sneered, Zhao Jian, since it's your first offense, I won't lower myself to your level. If there's a next time, I'll slap you. Zhao Jian said that he didn't dare. The masked Chen asked, you said there were two inexplicable horse neighs. Is it the horse of your Misty Hall? Aren't the horses of your Misty Hall all in the woods? Chen looked at Chang'e, then at Yang Ruping and Aunt Qin. She still said timidly, that's what we thought. We haven't seen any disciples from other halls for several days. If I'm not mistaken, this horse belongs to our Misty Hall. But didn't you say that you were all in the woods? Chen was anxious and said, that's what we thought at the beginning, but later on, when we carefully recalled it, it seems that Senior Zhao Jian and Senior Xia Zai rode out to call the patrolling disciples. But we didn't pay attention to whether they came back. Zhao Jian's face changed slightly when he heard this. He was about to go forward, but he stopped when he thought of the warning just now. The masked Chen nodded. That is to say, Chen, Chang'e and Zhang Xiaohu discussed and felt that it was the horse of Zhao Jian and Xia Zai, but you couldn't be sure that it was them. This? Chen hesitated and nodded. Yes, I was also very scared at that time. The blood wolves were not far away, and I only wanted to pray that they would leave quickly. How could I pay attention to anything else? The masked Chen asked again. Chang'e, is Chen right? Are you and Zhang Xiaohu not sure? Chang'e thought for a moment and nodded. Yes, Lord Messenger, I'm not sure either. What about you? Zhang Xiaohu, are you not sure either? You just need to nod. It had to be said that the Yuhuandan pill of the Xiangism was magical. After the seriously injured Zhang Xiaohu took the Yuhuandan pill, he had already woken up. His breathing was long and steady, not as intermittent as before. What could Zhang Xiaohu say? He could only nod. At that time, he really didn't notice whether or not the two of them had returned to the forest. He was only guessing based on his intuition. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua was still somewhat confused. Zhang Xiaohu and Chang'e had also told him about this matter. But if that was the case, the one who should be locked up in the dungeon should be Zhao Jian. How could it be Zhang Xiaohu? However, when he saw that Chen had given the Yuhuandan pill to Chang'e, he was temporarily relieved. As long as his second brother's life was saved, nothing else mattered. What next? The masked Chen asked. Catch? Chen looked at Chang'e and said, after that, Senior Brother Zhang, Senior Sister Chang'e, and I rode the horses and ran wildly. Although the horses were more handsome than the horses of the other senior brothers and senior sisters, after the other senior brothers and senior sisters were eaten by the wolves, we were caught up by the wolves. But just as the wolves were about to eat us, there was a sudden roar that shook the whole valley. Those wolves immediately stopped and then quickly ran south. You're talking about a roar? The masked Chen asked. Was it the same as the previous roars and could be heard by the whole Yulong Grand Canyon? Chen nodded. Yes, it was the same as before, but it was changed to the direction of the south exit. The masked Chen nodded thoughtfully. What next? Chen thought for a moment and said, then we had nothing to eat. We picked some vermilion fruits by a pool and then fainted. When we woke up, our power was greatly improved. The masked Chen smiled and said, Chen, you're so lucky that you can pick the legendary vermilion fruit? I've been looking for it for a long time but still couldn't find it. After that, he waved his hand and said, come here. Chen walked over obediently. The masked Chen checked for a moment and nodded. There's still a lot of medicine in your body that hasn't been refined. You're not lying. Then he asked, By the way, who thought of using elk to drive the carriage? And who caught the elk? Hearing this, Qin Shun said with a smile of exultation, Senior brother Zhang is really amazing. When I woke up that day, he and senior sister Chang'e had caught 4 elks nearby. Then we went back to the woods and picked out all the rare herbs from the original carriage. We gathered them in the 4 carriages and let the elks pull them out of the woods. The masked Qin Shun turned his head and asked, Chang'e, tell us what happened at that time. Chang'e said, Senior brother Zhang and I woke up first. Senior brother Zhang remembered the herbs in the woods and said that they were exchanged with the blood of the disciples in the hall and should be taken out. At that time, we just wanted to take some for each of us. But when we saw elk passing by, I had an idea and thought of using elk to pull the carriage. Then why are there 4 elk and not 3? Messenger, there were only 2 of us. Chun Chun was still in a coma, so each of us could only subdue 2 elk. After all, we didn't have a third hand. Chang'e answered calmly. Not far away, Zhang Xiaohua was also in a cold sweat. This was indeed a flaw. She was rescued by Zhang Xiaohu and others when they left the valley. At that time, there were already 4 carriages, and one of them was undriven. It was not designed by her that each of them could drive 1 carriage. Qin Shun next to her also sighed. It's a pity that I didn't wake up in time. Otherwise, I could have helped senior brother Zhang catch 1 more elk and pull 1 more carriage out. There were a lot of herbs, which were exchanged with the lives of senior brother Zhang and senior sister Chang'e. As soon as these words came out, the whole misty hall was silent. The masked Qin Shun smiled and said, Qin Shun, you've done a good job. It's a great contribution to help senior brother Zhang and senior sister Chang'e get the carriage back. Then the masked Qin Shun asked, what happened later? How did you save the disciples of the Tuodu Hall and the female disciples of the inner branch? Qin Shun no longer hesitated and told the story that he had made up in the future, just like Zhang Xiaohua. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua was secretly proud. I, Xiaoxia, am good at making up stories, no worse than some scholars. The masked Qin Shun nodded and said, Qin Shun, are you telling the truth? Of course, Lord Messenger. Then, do you think Zhang Xiaohu has anything to do with the animal tide? Animal tide? How could the animal tide have anything to do with senior brother Zhang? Hearing this, Qin Shun's expression changed greatly. Even Chang'e next to him was panicked. Looking at Zhang Xiaohu lying on the stretcher, he quickly shook his head and explained, Lord Messenger, it's all the framing of senior brother Zhao and Deputy Hall Master Zhong. How could senior brother Zhang have anything to do with the animal tide? He has been with us all the time. When the animal tide happened, senior brother Zhao was also there. How could he say that senior brother Zhao is related to the animal tide? Since Chang'e and Qin Shun were taken to the dungeon, they did not understand what was going on at first. After Yang Ruping and Aunt Qin's inquiries, as well as Zhong Pei's indirect inquiries, how could they not understand the reason behind it? It was just that they felt that Zhao Jian and Zhong Pei had no reason to frame Zhang Xiaohu. At the same time, they faintly felt that Zhao Jian was guilty. Of course, it was just a feeling. They did not have any real evidence. The masked Qin Shun did not comment and asked, Qin Shun, Chang'e, do you have anything else to say? Qin Shun and Chang'e shook their heads. At this time, Zhang Xiaohu raised his finger with difficulty and pointed at Zhao Jian. He said something softly, but even if Chang'e put his ear next to Zhang Xiaohu's mouth, he could not hear clearly. He could only faintly hear. Gong, gong. Zhang Xiaohu actually wanted to say that Zhao Jian had sinisterly broken his dantian and crippled his entire body's internal energy. He had a guilty conscience, but he was seriously injured and could not speak clearly. How could he accuse him? Chang'e listened for a long time and still could not understand. He could only look at the masked Qin Shun and shake his head slightly. The masked Qin Shun turned to look at Zhong Pei and said, Deputy Hall Master Zhong, you can tell us your reason? Zhong Pei cupped his hands and said, Thank you, Envoy Chun, for giving me this opportunity. Then he cleared his throat and told Qin Shun about the conspiracy between him and Zhao Jian. Zhong Pei's eloquence was very good. He was like a lotus flower with his tongue, vividly describing his suspicions. It was as if Zhang Xiaohu was the instigator of the beast tide, and the group of beasts in the Yulong Grand Canyon were under the command of Zhang Xiaohu. Zhang Xiaohu's purpose in going to the Yulong Grand Canyon was to slaughter thousands of ordinary disciples of the Shangzi cult. Until the end, Zhong Pei did not leave any trace. How could Zhang Xiaohu have such magical powers? He must have been instructed by someone. But who were these people? This question was thrown to the masked Qin Shan. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua, who was standing among the inner disciples, finally understood why his second brother was sent to the dungeon by Zhong Pei and suffered such torture. It turned out that Zhong Pei wanted to fight for fame and gain the favor of the leader of the Shangzi cult. The angry Zhang Xiaohua was in an incomparably bad mood. It doesn't matter if you fight for power, but to step on the corpses of small people is your fault. This kind of behavior of harming people behind their backs is even worse than the blood wolves in the Yulon Grand Canyon. Well, since I'm here, then second brother's grievances can't be in vain. Staring at Zhong Pei, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes gradually narrowed. But at this time, the masked Qian Shan raised his head and looked at Zhao Jian. Zhao Jian, didn't you always want to speak? Now, it's your turn. From now on, I will remember everything you say and report it to Lord Sect Leader without changing a word. Zhao Jian took a step forward and bowed. Thank you, Lord Messenger. Then, he pointed at Zhang Xiaohu and said, They're lying. Qin Shan was anxious when he heard this and said in a shrill voice, Zhao Jian, why do you say we're lying? The masked Qin Shan stopped him. Qin Shan, shut up. Whether they're lying or not, it's up to me to decide. Although he stopped him, there was some excitement in his tone. Zhang Xiaohua, who was behind him, unconsciously curled his lips. He understood Qian Qin's mood. Talking to someone with the same name was like talking to two of himself. It was quite novel. It was exactly Qian Qin's favorite trick. -3. Chapter 720. Qin Shan saw that the messenger had stopped him and didn't dare to say more. He lowered his head in grievance. The masked Qin Shan looked on with interest and said to Zhao Jian, Tell me what you think is true. Zhao Jian's eyes were filled with deep emotions as he recounted everything he knew. In the end, he concluded, Do you know, Messenger Qin, when I saw that my brothers were buried in the belly of the wolves, my heart was broken. I also wanted to go with them. That way, they wouldn't be alone on the road back to the Yellow Springs. At least, we could hold hands and go together. However, I also know that there are more brothers in Serene Peak waiting for me to bring back news of the brothers in Yulon Mulian. I can't be so depressed. I still have a complete body to serve Sir Hierarch. So, I wiped my tears and hid my grief and indignation deep in my heart. I silently thought of Sir Hierarch and fled all the way back to Serene Peak from the Yulon Prairie. Zhang Xiaohua's stomach spasmed when he heard this. He didn't expect that senior brother Zhao, who looked so bright, would be so fluent in flattery. Then, Zhao Jian changed the topic and said with great grief and indignation, After returning from the Yulon Grand Canyon, I have always felt guilty. I couldn't bring back the brothers who went with me. I regret it very much. Why is my martial arts so bad? However, before I could escape from the abyss of grief, I heard the news that junior brother Zhang Xiaohu had returned safely from the Yulon Grand Canyon. You don't know how excited and happy I was at that time. However, when Zhang Xiaohu came back, I saw the 4 carriages of Spirit Grass and junior sister Chang'e and junior sister Qin Chun were safe and sound. My upright heart couldn't help but have doubts. Yes, I didn't want to doubt. I didn't want to doubt Zhang Xiaohu, who was like a brother to me. He was usually so loyal and honest. Moreover, as a direct disciple of the Misty School, he was supported by most of us disciples. This direct disciple of the Misty School, Zhao Jian's words were especially clear and heavy. However, my conscience tells me that I have to say it. I have to say it on behalf of the dozens of brothers in the underworld. They can't die in vain. It's true, Lord Messenger. Although the situation was urgent, I still cared about my brothers. My eyes never left the pack of wolves. Zhang Xiaohu was really submerged in the pack of wolves, and there was no possibility of survival. But now he is actually standing in front of us. I don't need to say it. You should be able to think of something. If I say that Zhang Xiaohu has nothing to do with this blood wolf pack, would you believe it? Hearing this, the disciples in the hall went into an uproar and started whispering to each other. All the disciples knew about Zhang Xiaohu's matter, but because of Yang Rupiying and Zhong Pei, everyone was not clear about the details. These days, there had been a lot of rumors, and there were all kinds of versions, but no one would have thought of this, because after all, Zhang Xiaohu was able to bring the 4 carriages of spirit grass back to the Serene Peak, which could be considered a great merit. Now that they heard Vice Hall Master Zhong's words and Zhao Jian's instigation, they couldn't help but suspect. That's right, dozens of disciples have died, and Zhang Xiaohu's martial arts are not high. How could he have survived? Furthermore, he saved a lot of people and brought back a lot of spirit grass. Hearing the noisy discussions of the disciples and their distrustful gazes, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but feel regretful. Why didn't she think of this earlier? No matter what Zhao Jian's intentions were, what he said was reasonable. These things could not be explained very well. Although Qin Shan had already said that he had eaten the cinnabar fruit and increased his power, it was still a bit far-fetched. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but feel anxious. She lowered her head and thought, if things developed unfavorably for Zhang Xiaohu, how should she deal with it? Shut up. The masked Chun Chan berated, and the entire Misty Hall immediately fell silent. Then he said, Zhao Jian, do you have any evidence for your words? Zhao Jian shook his head. No. All the disciples died in the Yulon Grand Canyon, and I barely escaped. Where is the evidence? The masked Qinshan asked Qinshan again, Qinshan, do you have any evidence? Qinshan shook his head. Then he turned to ask Zhong Pei, Vice Hall Master Zhong, who do you think is telling the truth? Zhong Pei cupped his hands. I know that Zhao Jian is telling the truth, so I put Zhang Xiaohu in the dungeon. I believe Zhao Jian. Good. The masked Qinshan nodded and said to Yang Rupiying, what do you think, Hall Master Yang? This. Yang Rupiying hesitated. To be honest, she was also moved by Zhao Jian's words. After all, what Zhao Jian said was reasonable. Of course, his final conclusion was also a bit unimaginable. I believe in Zhang Xiaohu, Yang Rupiying said reluctantly. When the word believe came out, Zhang Xiaohua was a bit angry. Her second brother risked his life to bring back 4 carts of spirit grass, and in exchange, the Misty Hall Master trusted him so little. It was really not worth it. What about Vice Hall Master Qin? The masked Qinshan asked again. Lord Messenger, although I know Zhang Xiaohu and I don't dare to judge his affairs, I believe in Chang'e and Qinshan. They were brought up by me. What they say is what I want to say. Madame Qin was resolute, but after thinking about it, she was a bit soft-spoken. However, what she said was reasonable. Zhang Xiaohu joined the Misty School halfway. When he came to the Serene Peak, he was not with Madame Qin and the others. It was reasonable to say that he didn't know them. There was no flaw in Madame Qin's words, but in the ears of the disciples in the hall, it was a bit inappropriate. The disciples' hesitant eyes became more and more puzzled. Haha. The masked Qinshan laughed and said loudly, what about the disciples in the hall? Who do you think is right and who is wrong? Seeing that everyone was silent, he waved his hand and said, those who believe in Zhang Xiaohu, stand on the left. Those who believe in Zhao Jian, stand on the right. Those who don't know who is right and who is wrong, stand in the middle. As soon as he finished speaking, the disciples panicked. After a while, Zhang Xiaohua looked at them. Among the disciples, 5 of them stood on the right and 4 of them stood in the middle. Those who believed in Zhang Xiaohu stood on the left, only 1 of them. Clap, clap, clap. The masked Qinshan clapped his hands and asked softly, Qinshan, do you have anything to say? This. Qinshan's face was pale and he said in a trembling voice, Lord Messenger, Senior Brother Zhang is indeed. While they were talking, there was a loud bang and the closed door of the Misty Hall was pushed open. The strong sunlight outside shone in, making many people squint their eyes slightly. In the sunlight, a middle-aged man with a straight back walked in with heavy but firm steps. Who are you? The masked Qinshan said angrily. I am here. How dare you break in, however? The man still walked into the hall step by step. His shadow in the sunlight was extremely bright. When the disciple next to him closed the door of the Misty Hall again, everyone saw clearly that he was Zhang Xiaohu's master, One Hai, who had been abolished of his martial arts and had never come to the Misty Hall. Zhang Xiaohua stood behind. Although he didn't move, his heart was warm and his eyes were moist. When he saw Wen Hai, his first impression was that gentle young master he saw in Lu Town, the young Xiaoxia who came from the sky and saved him and his father from the hands of bullies. At this moment, although Wen Hai was not old, his spirit was not as good as before, and his movements were no longer as nimble as before. He was not much different from an ordinary burly man, and this was the result of his inner strength being crippled. When Wen Hai walked to the front of the hall, bowed to Yang Rupiying and said, "Master's wife." Yang Rupiying got up and returned the salute. Then she said, "Wen Hai, why are you here instead of resting?" "Oh, this is Lord Qin, the messenger sent by the hierarch of Lingxiang Peak." When Wen Hai cupped his hands and said, "I am Wen Hai from Misty School." "Greetings, Messenger Chun." He said Misty School instead of Misty Hall. The masked Chen Chun didn't care about it. He waved his hand and said, "I wonder what Heroine has to say?" When Wen Hai straightened his back and glanced at Zhong Pei from the corner of his eyes, his expression was full of disdain. Withdrawing his disdainful look from Zhong Pei, when Wen Hai said to the masked Chen Chun, "When I came to Shixin Peak, I never entered Misty Hall. I don't care about anything on Shixin Peak. It's just that I haven't seen this disappointing disciple of mine for a long time. So I asked someone and found out that such a thing had happened. Lord Qin, just now I heard clearly outside the door. Isn't Zhong Pei trying to find the person behind Zhang Xiaohu? I came. I'd like to see how a cripple like me who has lost all his martial arts can have a connection with the beast tied in the Yulon Canyon." When Wen Hai stood there as steady as Mount Tai and looked at Zhong Pei with bright eyes. For a moment, Zhong Pei felt that he didn't dare to face him. "Hero One, I know you love your disciple, but Vice Hall Leader Zhong is just guessing. Am I not looking for evidence? Then let me ask you, you are standing here. What evidence do you have to prove that you and Zhang Xiaohu have nothing to do with the beast tied in the Yulon Canyon?" Then, he pointed to the disciples in the hall and said, "You see, I don't need to say anything. How many of your own disciples in Shixin Peak believe your disciple Zhang Xiaohu?" When Wen Hai looked at the three groups of disciples in the hall, many of them were a little ashamed and lowered their heads. With a smile on his face, when Wen Hai looked around and said, "Regardless of whether you support it or not, there is only one truth. No one can fake it, right? They have the right to choose. I won't blame them no matter who they choose. On the contrary, if they go against their conscience for power and reputation, then I'm ashamed." When Wen Hai's words were powerful and resonant. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua's blood surged. She couldn't help but feel a sense of heroism spontaneously rise. "Isn't it just unfair? With the 3-feet-long sword in my hand, I'd like to see who dares to say no. Lingering fragrance peak? Then, I'll just topple this lingering fragrance peak." -3. Chapter 721. Hearing this, the masked Chen Chen smiled and said, "Master One, you can see it clearly, but don't you want to see your disciple's injury?" When Wen Hai glanced to the side and saw Zhang Xiaohu's eyes full of grief and indignation, he said with a smile, "As long as he is alive, there will always be life. At worst, he will only have some dry firewood like me. There is no need to see him." The masked Chen Chen asked curiously, "Master One, are you here to accept your punishment? Don't you want to say something? Do you want to say something for your disciple?" When Wen Hai shook his head and said, "If you want to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext. Xiaohu has made such a great contribution to the Misty Hall, but he was destroyed by you with a groundless accusation. What else can I say? I came here today just to see. Aren't you looking for the person behind Zhang Xiaohu? Who else is there except me? If you have any problems, just come to me. At worst, I will give you my head to fulfill my wish several years ago." Although when Wen Hai was talking to Qin Chun, he also looked at Yang Rupiying several times, which made Yang Rupiying quite embarrassed. Hearing Wen Hai's heroic words, all the disciples were a little ashamed. The masked Chun Chun stood up from the chair and clapped his hands and praised, "Master One, you are so forthright that I admire you." Then, he turned around and said to Zhong Pei, "Zhong Pei, do you think you are the only smart person? Do you think you can play everyone on the Shixin Peak and the inner disciples on the Lingxiang Peak in the palm of your hand with such means? Zhongpei was stunned and quickly stood up and said excitedly, Envoy Chun, please understand. I am loyal to the Lingxiang Peak. I am trying my best to complete the task of the sect master. Seeing that Zhongpei still wanted to argue, the masked Chun Chun took out the jade talisman from his arms and held it above his head. He shouted, Pass the sect master's decree. Zhongpei did not dare to speak at once. He bowed and said, Please tell me. The masked Chun Chun said, Zhongpei, do you think I am a fool? Do you want to fool me with such a non-existent thing? Why don't you use your cleverness on the right path? I know that you want to make some contributions, but you have to find something reliable to do. Don't mention the beast tide of Yulan Mu. Deputy Hall Chief Zhong, use your heel and think about it. Is that something the disciples of the Misty Hall can control? It's the work of Yellow Wind and Black Lightning. We'll look into it when we have the time. There's no need for Vice Hall Master Zhong to come. Zhongpei's face turned as red as a pig's liver. He mumbled to himself, not daring to say a word. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but have a good impression of this sect master, whom he had never met before. Fortunately, you're not muddle-headed from old age. You can still distinguish the cause of the matter. Then, he did not know whether to laugh or cry at the masked Chun Chun. This guy had already received the order from the sect master that he only needed to pass it on to the Serene Peak, and everyone would have to listen to it. But this guy, on the other hand, kept shouting this and that, insisting on being the so-called righteous one time, making him worry for nothing for a long time. After reading the decree of the sect master, the masked Chun Chun put away the jade talisman and said to Zhongpei with a cold face, Zhongpei, the matter of the beast tide ends here. Do you know? Zhongpei said obsequiously, This lowly one knows. This lowly one was also blinded for a moment and wanted to make some contributions for Lingering Fragrance Peak. I didn't expect that I was deviated. This matter will never be mentioned again. Up to this point, things were not out of Zhongpei's control. He had made preparations for both sides. If he succeeded, he would have completed some unspeakable tasks given to him by the hierarch. If he failed, he would have been punished by the hierarch. Not far away, Zhao Jian's face was green and red. He was unwilling, but if Zhongpei did not dare to say anything, what could he do? Who knew that the masked Chun Chun would say, The sect master is extremely dissatisfied with you. You stirred up a storm, but you fell into the scheme of others. Well, sit down first. When I return to the Lingxiang Peak, you will return with me and ask for forgiveness in front of the sect master. The scheme of others? Zhongpei was stunned. He raised his head and looked at Zhao Jian. Zhao Jian, what did you do behind my back? When Zhao Jian heard this, he became anxious. He stepped forward and said, Vice Hall Master Zhong, I am innocent. I did not do anything. I only did what I should do according to your instructions. These words were vague, but it was also very clear that Zhao Jian had entered the Yulon Grand Canyon because of Zhongpei's instructions. You, Zhongpei said angrily, you still dare to talk nonsense? The masked Chun Chun waved his hand. Zhongpei, sit down. Your task in the Serene Peak has been completed. There will be a successor to replace you. Then he said to Yang Ruping, Hall Master Yang, the sect master will arrange a suitable person for you to live in harmony and develop the Misty Hall together. Yang Ruping nodded. Thank you for the arrangement. Well, Hero One, you can sit down now. Everything in the Yuanxiang cult is under the control of the sect master. He will not wrongly accuse a good person, nor will he let a bad person go. When One Hai snorted, but obediently found a seat to sit down. The masked Chun Chun sat back in his chair and quietly looked at Zhao Jian for a long time. He said in a deep voice, Zhao Jian, are you not going to say anything? Zhao Jian cupped his hands and said, I have said what I should say. There is nothing more to say. Well, good. The masked Chun Chun asked, then I would like to ask again. Did the two inexplicable horse neighs in the Yulon Grand Canyon have anything to do with you? Zhao Jian shook his head and said, absolutely not. I didn't hear any horse neighs. If my guess is wrong, then Junior Brother Zhang and the others also escaped from the Blood Wolf. I have wrongly accused a good person. I can apologize to Junior Brother Zhang. Hee. The masked Chun Chun sneered. If you don't have any ulterior motives, why did you suggest such an idea to Zhongpei when Zhang Xiaohu and the others came back? This, Zhao Jian was somewhat speechless. When he suggested the plan to Zhong Pei, there was obviously no one around. How did the sect master, who was far away in the Lingxiang Peak, know about it? After thinking for a moment, Zhao Jian hardened his heart and said, "Since Lord Envoy knows about this, then this little one will tell you everything." Bringing my fellow disciples into the Yulon Grand Canyon to gather herbs was due to my hard work. Gathering more than 10 carriages of rare herbs was also due to my contribution. Even if we encountered a beast tide, I thought that I would be able to escape and bring back some herbs. But this Zhang Xiaohu actually came back alive and brought back 4 carriages worth of herbs. He actually became the greatest contributor to the Yulon Grand Canyon. What about me? I became the pitiful worm in the mouths of the other disciples. Everything that I worked so hard to do was obtained by him by luck. His martial arts are ordinary. How can he block my path? Yes, Lord Envoy is right. I am jealous. Really, I am incomparably jealous. He is only a direct disciple of the Misty School. He took all the glory of being a direct disciple. He learned the Misty Divine Art and practiced the Misty Seven Swords. These were all obtained by him effortlessly. But what about me? My martial arts are stronger than his, and my swordsmanship is better than his. But what did I obtain after 10 years of hard work? The more Zhao Jian spoke, the more agitated he became. It was as though he was about to step on Zhang Xiaohu's nose. Zhang Xiaohu was lying on the stretcher. He was so angry that his face turned red and his eyes were wide open. He pointed at Zhao Jian with difficulty and wanted to say something. But after a moment, he regained his composure and looked at Zhao Jian's performance pitifully. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he couldn't help but smack his lips. This fellow was really boring. He didn't know about the other direct disciples, but when it came to his second brother, he knew very well. If he didn't exchange his life for sect leader O's little sister, how could his second brother enter the Misty School? The identity of a direct disciple was also incomparably awkward back then. Now, he was actually envied by an ordinary disciple. This was something that Zhang Xiaohua had never thought of. Zhao Jian spoke for a while more, and the surrounding disciples also came to a realization. They looked at Zhao Jian with some disdain, but at the same time, there was some sympathy. What he said was not false. Many disciples would occasionally have such complaints, but they would all say it secretly and not dare to surface it on the surface. After a series of sonorous and forceful explanations, Zhao Jian finally said, "Lord Envoy, I know I was wrong, but I feel that there is nothing to regret. The martial arts world is a place where the strong preys on the weak. Since I have done something wrong, I should be punished. I am willing to apologize to junior brother Zhang and accept the punishment of the Misty Hall." The masked Qinshan turned his head and smiled. "Since you are accepting the punishment of the Misty Hall, then you should listen to Hall Master Yang's opinion." When young Rupiang heard this, she hesitated and said, "Although Zhao Jian is jealous of Zhang Xiaohu and has done something wrong, but, after all, it is pardonable. Moreover, he has also made some contributions in the Yulon Grand Canyon. I think." Aunt Qin, who was at the side, could not accept it and said anxiously, "Hall Master Yang, Zhao Jian is jealous of junior brother, and the things he has done are not small. If not for the sect leader's clear investigation, Zhang Xiaohu's life would have been gone. How can he be spared?" "This," young Rupiang muttered, "Zhao Jian has also done a lot of things in the hall, and his martial arts is the highest among the second-generation disciples." Seeing that young Rupiang was somewhat protective and indecisive, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but frown. At this time, the masked Qinshan opened his mouth and said with a smile, "This is the punishment of your Misty Hall. You can slowly discuss it in the future." Then he suddenly raised his head and asked Zhao Jian, "What is the third rule of the fragrant cult?" "Disciples of the cult who kill each other," Zhao Jian blurted out, and then his face turned pale. The next few words were said with gritted teeth. "Kill, without pardon. Good, you still remember." The masked Qinshan clapped his hands and said, "But why did you still do it?" Zhao Jian turned pale with fright. -3. Chapter 722. The Envoy is Wise. Zhao Jian hurriedly shouted. Zhang Xiaohu's injuries were caused by the law enforcement disciples. I only whipped him occasionally to appease the injustice in my heart. I have no intention of taking junior brother Zhang's life. The pitiful Zhang Xiaohu didn't even have the strength to open his mouth. Even if he was tormented by Zhao Jian, he couldn't say a word. The surrounding disciples couldn't help but whisper among themselves. They felt that the envoy from the lingering fragrance peak was making a mountain out of a molehill. The masked Chen smiled and said, Zhao Jian, don't try to avoid the important and dwell on the trivial. I just want to know if you were the one who caused the blood wolves in the Yulon Grand Canyon. The entire place was silent. Zhao Jian pointed his finger to the sky and said, the heavens above and the earth below. The two horse neighs were definitely an illusion of junior brother Zhang's group. I definitely didn't do it. If I was the one who did it, I would have been struck to death by the heavens. Zhao Jian, on the other hand, was tense. He saw that the emissary of the lingering fragrance peak was very particular about evidence. Out of all the Misty Hall disciples who participated in the trial, only the 4 of them came back alive. Zhang Xiaohu and the other 2 were obviously in cahoots. Their words could not be trusted. He wanted to see how this emissary would judge. Zhang Xiaohua also frowned. When he met Zhang Xiaohu, it was already later on. He also heard about the incident in the forest from Zhang Xiaohu. To be honest, it couldn't be used as evidence, and he couldn't be sure that it was Zhao Jian who did it. In fact, even if Zhao Jian admitted that he was the one who caused the horse neighs, it was only due to negligence. It couldn't be considered as fratricide. Haha. The masked Chunshan laughed again. Since ancient times, traitors have always been stubborn. It seems like you are the same. You won't give up until you see the river. Men, bring her up. As soon as he said that, Zhao Jian's face changed drastically. He barely managed to stand still, and his eyes darted around as he glanced at the door. Several inner disciples standing behind Chen Chen heard the order and walked out. Not long after, they brought in a stretcher from outside the hall. On the stretcher was an inner disciple with a veil covering her face. Zhao Jian's expression softened. He looked at Xiao Qin strangely and did not say anything. The masked Chen asked, Zhao Jian, look at this woman. Do you recognize her? Zhao Jian pretended to take a look and cupped his hands. Senior sister seems to be seriously injured. It's a pity that I've always stayed in Shirxin Peak and had no chance to see senior sister lingering fragrance peak. Even when I brought the disciples of Misty Hall to train in Yulon Grand Canyon, I've never seen you before.
Yes.
The masked Chen asked, Chen, do you know this woman? Chen looked at her for a long time, then bit his lip and said, Messenger, the clothes this woman is wearing are mine and senior sister Changa's. She should be the inner disciple we saved on the Yulon Prairie. Yes, good. Chen turned his head and said, Ren Xiaoyao, come forward and take a look. Do you recognize this woman? Zhang Xiaohua did not expect Chen to suddenly call her and was stunned. Then, she looked at the familiar faces of Wen Hai and Aunt Qin and slowly walked out from the group of inner disciples. Wen Hai was sitting there calmly, but when he saw Zhang Xiaohua's appearance, he was shocked. After staring for a moment, he regained his composure. Yang Rupiying had never seen Zhang Xiaohua before. When she heard Chen suddenly calling her from behind, she was also taken aback. Aunt Qin, who was next to her, quickly went up and briefly explained Zhang Xiaohua's origin. She also handed over the silk in her arms. Yang Rupiying saw this and nodded slightly. When Chang'e and Chen heard the name of Ren Xiaoyao, they did not react at first. But when they saw Zhang Xiaohua come out, they were surprised and happy. Then they remembered that Ren Xiaoyao was Zhang Xiaohua. But then they stole a glance at Chen and did not dare to be too happy. Zhang Xiaohua walked to the front of the hall. First, she bowed to Zhang Xiaohu and Chang'e and said, Ren Xiaoyao of the Pill-expanding hall pays his respects to the 3 saviors. Zhang Xiaohu smiled and moved his fingers slightly. Chang'e and Chen also saluted back. After that, Zhang Xiaohua walked in front of the woman and reached out to pick up her arm and other parts. He carefully pinched it, then stood up and said, reporting to Lord Envoy, this is the inner court female disciple that we saved in the Yulon Grand Canyon that day. The bone injuries on her body were all treated by this little one, so I still recognize them. Good. The masked Chen said, sit down. Zhang Xiaohua looked left and right, then chose the seat next to Wen Hai and sat down. The masked Chen asked again, Zhao Jian, you really don't know this female disciple? Seeing Chunshan ask again and again, Zhao Jin frowned and said, I'm really not familiar with her. At this time, the woman on the stretcher opened her mouth and said in a hoarse voice, Zhao Jin, you don't know me? Do you want me to call you junior brother Zhao or husband Zhao before you will recognize me? When Zhao Jin heard this, he was puzzled at first, but then he was stunned as if he had been struck by lightning. After a long while, he hesitated and said, You are Xia, senior sister Xia? Chang'e and Chenshin also exclaimed, You are senior sister Xia? The hoarse voice sighed and said, Is it junior sister Chang'e and junior sister Chenshin? I heard from Lord Chun that it was you and junior brother Zhang who saved me. Alas, why did you save me? You might as well let me die. But then the woman said hurriedly, No, I can't die. If I die, who can expose the shameless face of a despicable person like Zhao Jian? When Aunt Qin, who was sitting there, heard that the masked woman was Xia Zai, she was overjoyed. However, when she saw Xia Zai's miserable state, and then looked at Qin Shun, who was sitting at the head of the table, her eyes were moist, but she did not dare to go forward. Zhao Jian's eyes turned quickly and immediately changed into a joyful expression. He cupped his hands and said, I didn't expect senior sister Xia to be lucky enough to survive. Congratulations, congratulations. Then, he looked puzzled. I wonder what I did to make senior sister misunderstand. You actually treat me like this? Xia Zai was flustered and said with a stutter, You. The masked Chen Shun looked at her coldly and turned to Aunt Qin. This Xia Zai was sent to our Lingxiang Peak by the disciples of Wuming Hall as an inner sect disciple. However, after we identified her, we found that she wasn't a disciple of our Lingxiang Peak. She had been unconscious for a few days, and we couldn't determine her identity. She only woke up a few days ago, and after some questioning, we reported to the cult master. The cult master took pity on her and granted her a veil, allowing her to cover her face in the cult of fragrance. He also asked me to send her to Shershin Peak. Of course, we can't determine whether she is real or fake. Aunt Qin didn't say anything, but Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. Why does wearing a veil in the cult of fragrance require the cult master's special approval? Could it be that it's one of the rules of the cult? Then, his right hand unconsciously touched the handkerchief in his chest and thought, I, Xiaoxia, have used this handkerchief countless times. If I'm caught red-handed by the inner sect disciples, won't I be chased for thousands of miles? Sigh, there really isn't any human rights in the cult of fragrance. When Aunt Qin heard Qin Qin's words, she couldn't hold back anymore. She stood up and walked to Xia Zai. She looked at Xia Zai, who was lying on the stretcher, but she couldn't tell who she was. Xia Zai's head was covered by a veil, and her entire body was covered by clothes. No one could tell who she was. Xia Zai heard Aunt Qin's footsteps and said with a choked voice, Master, you won't be able to recognize me. Aunt Qin comforted her. Zai, you grew up by my side. If I can't recognize you, who can? Then, you'll know when you remove my veil. Aunt Qin immediately had an ominous premonition. Therefore, she reached out her hand to remove Xia Zai's veil. Chang'e and Qin Shun, who were at the side, knew what she was going to do. They exclaimed softly, Master. After saying that, Chun Shun also walked forward and stood in front of Aunt Qin. He said softly, Master, senior sister Xia was disfigured long ago. You must be mentally prepared. Aunt Qin waved her hand. What a joke. Which child in the pugilistic world didn't have blood on their hands? Why would they be afraid of this? As she spoke, she removed the veil. However, even though Aunt Qin was mentally prepared and knew that Xia Zai's face was disfigured, she was still shocked by what she saw. Under the veil was a head that was similar to a skull. There was no hair on the head, and only a small part of the head had a greenish-white scalp. There were many parts of the skull that revealed white bones. On the face, the 2 pools of autumn water had now become dry pools. There was also a black hole in the nose, and her lips were scattered. Her face was almost full of holes. Aunt Qin was dumbfounded. This was much scarier than a skeleton. How could she still see her original face? Moreover, this woman's voice had changed. If one tried to identify it, there were some traces of Xia Zai's voice. However, this didn't mean anything. Junior sister, put on the veil. I knew that Master wouldn't be able to recognize me. Aunt Qin felt that some tears had quietly fallen from her eyes. She quickly wiped them with her sleeves and quietly covered Xia Zai's face with the veil. At this moment, she didn't want to look at Xia Zai's hands that were hidden in her sleeves. Her face was already like this. How good could her body be? After thinking for a while, Aunt Qin moved her mouth close to Xia Zai's ears that had basically become a black hole and whispered a few words. Then, she also moved her ears close to Xia Zai's mouth to hear her reply. The others all watched quietly and couldn't hear anything. However, Zhang Xiaohua's six senses were several times more sensitive than others. Even if he didn't use his martial arts, he could still hear the sounds. However, when he heard, first, pain, his face turned red. He looked at the ceiling and then at the ground. From time to time, he would dig his ears as if there were lice on his body. When One Hai, who was beside him, had been secretly observing him. At this moment, he couldn't help but wonder, when did my peripheral vision become so powerful? The two of them talked for a while. Aunt Qin straightened up and gestured for Chen Chun to identify it as well. Chen Chun thought for a while and spoke in a low voice like Aunt Qin. However, his face was a little red. After Xia Zai finished answering, her face became even more shy and cute. She nodded vigorously at Aunt Qin. Chen Chen, who was wearing the veil, was curious and asked, Aunt Qin, can you identify it? -3. Chapter 7:23. When Zhang Xiaohua, who was seated far away, heard Chen Chen's silent question, she couldn't help but sit stiffly on the chair. She didn't move an inch and had a look of disbelief on her face. This Chen Chen is too good at messing around. He can even do such a thing? Hee, this is the only way to tell if this is the real Xia Zai or not. Seeing Chen Chen's flushed face, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but laugh secretly. When Aunt Qin heard Chen Chen's question, she stood up and cupped her hands. Reporting to Lord Envoy, my disciple Chen Chen and I have confirmed that this is indeed my disciple, Xia Zai. The masked Chen Chen clapped his hands. Good, that's good. Since we can confirm it, Junior Sister Xia, please tell everyone about your encounter in the Yulong Grand Canyon. When everyone heard this, they revealed a curious expression. Just now, Zhang Xiaohu and the other two were telling a story while Zhao Jian was telling another story. Who wouldn't know which was true and which was false? They wondered what kind of story this crippled Xia Zai could tell. Not far away, Zhao Jian's expression changed a few times before he gradually calmed down. He returned to his previous confident expression and, like everyone else, he revealed an interested expression. Xia Zai had lost her eyes and couldn't see everything around her. When she heard Chen Chen's instructions, she recounted her encounter. Her hoarse voice wasn't loud, but it rang out in the silent misty hall, causing everyone to be shocked. That day, Zhao Jian held Xia Zai's hand and came to the edge of the small forest. He instructed the patrolling disciples to go back and warn the herb-gathering disciples of the misty hall. Then, he tied his horse and Xia Zai's horse to a tree. After that, he held Xia Zai's hand and stealthily walked towards the wolf pack. Xia Zai was puzzled. She wanted to ask but was stopped by Chu Li's gentle gaze. He whispered, "Don't talk too much. Let's walk for a while and get closer to the wolf pack before we make a sound. Maybe we can lure the blood wolves to this side. Our light body technique is good, so we have a higher chance of escaping." Zhao Jian's image in Xia Zai's heart immediately became infinitely tall. She allowed Zhao Jian's hand to tighten and held Zhao Jian's hand in return. She had already decided in her heart, this is a good lover who is loyal and selfless. Even if I were to be fed to the blood wolves together with him, my heart would still be sweet. Sure enough, when they were some distance away from the blood wolf, Zhao Jian led him in another direction. It was different from the direction of the small forest. At this moment, a low-lying area appeared in front of them. There were some pawns. Xia Zai said softly, "Junior brother Zhao, we should reveal ourselves. Otherwise..." Before Xia Zai could finish her sentence, two horse neighs could be heard from afar. This is bad. Zhao Jian's face was filled with panic as he said, "I forgot about the two horses." When Xia Zai heard this, she also turned around to look. Sure enough, The two horse neighs had already attracted the attention of the blood wolves to the small forest. Xiaozai panicked and immediately leaped up. Zhao Jian was even more anxious as he hugged her and scolded, "What are you doing?" Before Xiaozai could say anything, the blood wolves in the distance had also discovered their tracks. Immediately, a few of them ran towards them. This is bad. This time, Zhao Jian seemed to be really panicking. He didn't say anything to Xiaozai and quickly dragged her forward. When they reached the side of the pond, he pulled out a few reeds from the side of the pond and handed them to Xiaozai. Then, he immediately dived into the pond. Xiaozai was a little hesitant. However, when she thought of the blood wolves behind her and the fact that the small forest had already been discovered by the blood wolves, she knew that it was impossible to lure all of the blood wolves to her location. Thus, she followed Zhao Jian and dived into the water with the reeds in her mouth. Although Xiaozai's martial arts were higher than Zhao Jian's and her internal energy was also long, she wasn't good at swimming. When she entered the water, she didn't know what to do. After being hugged by Zhao Jian, she was momentarily dazed. After an unknown amount of time, the blood wolves at the side of the pond wandered away in search of the two. Only then did the two emerge from the pond. Needless to say, the two of them were completely drenched, and it was no different from being naked. Xiaozai, who was in a daze, and Zhao Jian, who was distracted, easily turned the world upside down. When Xiaozai woke up, everything that should have happened had already happened. Even the wet clothes that were taken off at the side had been dried by the sun. The two of them put on their clothes. Xiaozai, who already had feelings for Zhao Jian, felt a little shy. To her, it was only a matter of time. She was only happy that she was able to find such a loyal and affectionate husband. Thus, she discussed with Zhao Jian and decided to check out the situation in the small forest. This suggestion was immediately rejected by Zhao Jian. If they were surrounded by blood wolves, how could they possibly survive? Furthermore, who could guarantee that there weren't one or two blood wolves there? If they were discovered, how could the two of them possibly survive? It was better to take advantage of the fact that the blood wolves had just left. The two of them could turn their grief into strength and quickly escape from the Yulon Grand Canyon to spread the news. Xiaozai pondered for a moment and agreed. Since everyone else was dead, the most important thing now was to protect their lives. Thus, the two of them headed towards the exit of the Yulon Grand Canyon. In the beginning, Xiaozai didn't have any doubts about Zhao Jian's arrangement. However, after a day, she thought about it carefully and had some doubts in her heart. She couldn't help but ask a few more questions. For example, why didn't he pass the horse to the other disciples and instead tie it to the tree? Why didn't he pick the direction where the blood wolves were going, but the direction beside them? Regarding these questions, Zhao Jian was a little hesitant. In the end, he said that it was just a momentary thought and he didn't make any careful arrangements. On the other hand, Xiaozai didn't think too much about it. After all, they were passionate and would always think positively. Furthermore, at that time, it was indeed urgent. Even she was at a loss and had a huge pressure in her heart. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to get together with Zhao Jian the moment they escaped danger. In the next 2 days, Xiaozai felt that something was wrong. Logically speaking, the most important thing for the two of them was to escape from the Yulon Grand Canyon. However, this Zhao Jian, whenever he had the time, he would find Xiaozai and do it several times a day. At first, Xiaozai thought that it was her first time doing it and that she was addicted to it. After all, she was aroused and tried her best to respond. However, day after day, it made Xiaozai develop a feeling that Zhao Jian was treating her as a tool and that every day he could use her was one more day. It was a pity that Xiaozai's vigilance was too late. Just when Xiaozai was suspicious, the two of them were about to enter the Yulon Grand Prairie. In a desolate cave on the mountainside, after doing it, Xiaozai's face was still flushed red. It was because Zhao Jian had sealed her acupuncture point. Xiaozai was alarmed and shouted for the reason. However, how could Zhao Jian be willing to tell her? He wanted to kill her immediately. Xiaozai was a famous disciple of the Mingtsue Hall, and her martial arts were above Zhao Jian's. She hurriedly used the Misty School's reverse blood corrosion secret technique to break through her sealed acupuncture point. Even so, she could only take advantage of Zhao Jian's carelessness to escape from the cave. If she wanted to defeat Zhao Jian, it would be extremely difficult. When Zhao Jian saw Xiaozai escaping, he was alarmed and immediately chased after her. Xiaozai panicked and fled to the top of the mountain. When she saw the cliff in front of her, she subconsciously stopped and turned around to ask Zhao Jian why he was doing this. Zhao Jian only laughed sinisterly and said, "You have already asked so many questions. If I keep you here, wouldn't I be looking for trouble? Only when you are dead will I be at ease." At this moment, Xiaozai finally understood that Zhao Jian had tied the horses outside the forest to attract the blood wolves. The direction he was escaping in was the rear wing of the blood wolves and wouldn't attract the attention of the blood wolves. As for herself, because of a coincidence, she had become Zhao Jian's plaything for a few days. Seeing that they were about to enter the Yulon Prairie and would be leaving in a few days, how could Zhao Jian allow someone who knew about the entire process to live? Even if this person was extremely in love with him, and might even be his intimate lover who would never tell anyone about it. Xiaozai was completely disheartened. She didn't even try to dodge Zhao Jian's palm strike that was aimed at her chest. Zhao Jian's move was a feint, and when he got close, he realized that he had increased the strength of his palm strike. He wanted to kill Xiaozai on the spot, but with the strength of his palm strike, Xiaozai was sent flying off the cliff. Seeing that Xiaozai had been struck by his own palm strike, he knew that she wouldn't be able to survive. Furthermore, she had fallen off the cliff, so it was even more impossible for her to survive. Zhao Jian couldn't find a corpse at the bottom of the mountain and left the valley with peace of mind. Even if Xiaozai didn't die, she wouldn't be able to cross the entire Yulon Prairie. However, Xiaozai was lucky. When the palm strike struck her, the strength of the reverse blood corrosion essence was still present and neutralized some of the palm strike. When she fell off the cliff, she was similarly caught by a tree branch at the bottom of the cliff. After waiting for half a day for the mountain wind to blow again, she fell down again. At this moment, the bones in her arms and legs were all broken. Xiaozai actually relied on her anger and desire to live to crawl forward until she was eaten by jackdaws before she fainted. Xiaozai naturally didn't know what happened after that. When she woke up, she was already at Lingering Fragrance Peak. Just as Xiaozai's voice fell, the sound of clapping could be heard amidst the sighs of the Misty Hall's disciples. Moreover, a voice of praise could be heard, "Good story, good plot." When everyone looked over, it was Zhao Jian who was a little panicked just now. Zhao Jian laughed and said, "Senior Sister Xia, I'll call you that for now. Since Vice Hall Master Qin and Junior Sister Chun Chun both said that you're real, I'll also believe that you're real. I don't know how you escaped, but you're slandering me and using my character to make up stories about me. How are you still the Senior Sister Xia that I've always respected? I don't know how I've offended you in the past. Or was it because I commanded you too much during the Yulon Prairie evening refinement that you felt that it affected your status? That's why you're telling such a ridiculous story." Xiaozai said angrily, "Zhao Jian, you're a heartless and ungrateful villain. Why don't you tell me how I'm fake? How can I use my own innocence to frame others?" There are more chapters. -3. Chapter 724. Zhao Jian shrugged his shoulders and said, "That's hard to say. Although I didn't see you like this, but seeing Vice Hall Master Qin's shocked expression, do you think anyone would still care about your innocence? If you can use it to do something, then it's still possible." "Zhao Jian, the masked Qinshin berated. What nonsense are you talking about? Even now, you still won't admit your guilt?" Zhao Jian cupped his hands and said, "Sir Envoy, what Martial Uncle once said just now is extremely right. If you want to condemn someone, why worry about the pretext? If you want to pin a crime on me, then I can't do anything about it. But think about it. These dozens of people are all disciples of my Misty Hall. We have lived together for more than 10 years and are brothers who have gone through life and death together. What use do I have for their lives?" Zhong Pei, who was sitting by the side, had an extremely ugly expression on his face. His eyes were wandering, and no one knew what he was thinking about. "Zhong Pei." The masked Chun Chin's shout gave Zhong Pei a fright. He immediately jumped up from his chair and cupped his hands. "Envoy Chun, speak. Did you instigate this matter?" The masked Chun Chin asked. "Sir Sect Leader has already made it clear that as long as you speak, You will be pardoned. Zhang Xiaohua, who was sitting at the bottom, heard this and couldn't help but feel a little angry. Dozens of lives, just because the mastermind is an inner disciple of the lingering fragrance peak. Sir Sect Leader will not pursue this matter. I think the matter of my second brother will not continue. He. Since this matter has been made known to this Xiaoxia, how can I not give justice to the disciples of the Misty Hall? But Zhong Pei gave a bitter laugh and said, reporting to Sir Chun, before I entered the valley, I did indeed have some instructions. This orchid twilight refinement is the most dangerous, and I allowed him to take the opportunity to get rid of a few disciples who were usually disobedient and a threat to him. Anyway, it's normal for people to die in the orchid twilight refinement, and it's not normal if they don't die. No one will pursue this matter, and this strategy is also in line with cough cough. But I have never asked him to leave dozens of disciples in the valley. There are also a few disciples that I have nurtured. However, this lowly one understands Zhao Jian's intentions. The masked Qinshan thought for a while and asked, is Zhao Jian the same as you? Does he want to make a big deal out of this? Anyway, he has been instructed by you. If he succeeds, he will have made the greatest contribution. Moreover, there will be no other disciple in the Misty Hall who can compete with him, no matter if it is, or if it is cultivated by you. Zhong Pei smiled bitterly again. That's probably the case. It's just that, this bastard is really generous. I didn't expect him to be so ambitious. Moreover, thousands of people died in the beast tide, so I didn't expect him to be the culprit. It's my fault. Let's return to lingering fragrance peak. No need. The masked Qinshan waved his hand and said, His Excellency's sect master said that as long as you admit it, he won't pursue the matter. Besides, you didn't instigate it, so there's no need to mention it. Then, he said to Zhao Jian, how is it? Since your backer has said so, can you still not admit it? Zhao Jian looked up to the sky and laughed. Ha ha ha, Envoy Chun. You have said so much, but it is all empty talk. Do you have any evidence? Just based on this woman who we don't even know if she is a human or a ghost. To be honest, I even doubt if she is Senior Sister Xia. I know that our cult of fragrance has always emphasized on evidence and fairness. How can I be convinced by your story? How can I explain this to all the disciples of the cult of fragrance? How can I explain this to the wise and mighty sect master? You can only force a confession and smear the name of the sect master. You. The masked Qinshan saw that Zhao Jian was stubbornly resisting. Even if he did not confess, he was furious. The entire Misty Hall was silent. Zhang Xiaohua was furious. This bastard is really too shameless. Didn't he know that he could use the bewitching finger? He had never used it before, so he might as well use it on this despicable thing. However, just as Zhang Xiaohua was about to stand up, he saw that although the masked Qinshan was angry, he was still sitting there calmly. He couldn't help but think, from Zhao Jian's tone, it seems like he's already going soft. He's actually placing his hopes on the so-called evidence, on the so-called wisdom of the sect master. But, just based on the decree that Qinshan passed down earlier, Zhong Pei didn't even have a chance to refute it. How could the sect master possibly be fair? Even Zhong Pei of the inner sect was like this, let alone the lowly Zhao Jian. Everything just now was just an act by Qinshan. What about now? Zhang Xiaohua could not help but think to herself, this girl is really bored. Just as Zhang Xiaohua gave herself a thumbs up for her own cleverness and gave the masked Qinshan a thumbs up, a hoarse voice sounded, Junior Brother Zhao, could it be that you have forgotten our intimate relationship? How can I not know that you have 6 fingers on your left foot? The disciples in the hall were stunned. Even they did not know that Senior Brother Zhao Jian had such a secret. It seemed that what Xia Zai said was true, but Zhao Jian's expression did not change. He laughed and said, I didn't expect Senior Sister Xia to still admire me. You even found out about my secret. Although there might not be any disciples in Shirxin Peak who know about the 6 fingers, there were a few senior brothers who knew about it when we were in Ethereal Mountain Villa. Haha, Senior Sister Xia actually had feelings for me at that time. Why didn't you say so earlier? Then, Junior Brother Zhao, what about the small mole on your thigh? The hoarse voice was still calm. This, Zhao Jian's expression changed drastically. For both men and women, the mole was the most secretive part of their bodies. Other than their parents and those who had physical contact with them, no one else knew about it. Since Xiaozai had mentioned this mole, it naturally proved that she had physical contact with Zhao Jian. And since they had physical contact with each other, everything she said was naturally true. At this moment, the hoarse voice sounded again. What? My junior martial brother Zhao, you didn't think of it, did you? Although the woman beneath you was already in a state of delirium, she still touched your entire body while you were enjoying yourself. I reckon that even you didn't know that you had a tiny mole the size of a grain of rice on your thigh. Xiaozai was right. When they were doing it, Zhao Jian only felt that Xiaozai's hand was abnormally comfortable. Although she deliberately avoided some places, how could she remember when she was in a state of delirium? Especially such a sensitive place. Moreover, the thigh was hidden. Who would notice it? To be honest, even Zhao Jian himself did not know that he had a small mole on his thigh. If it was not in front of others, he would want to touch it himself. It was probably impossible for him to see it. Instantly, all the male disciples in the Misty Palace looked at Zhao Jian's crotch in unison. Even Zhang Xiaohua was no exception. Zhao Jian immediately felt it and couldn't help but block it with his hand. Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua almost wanted to release her divine sense. But thinking about how secretive that place was, Zhang Xiaohua looked up and rolled her eyes. Please, am I, Xiaoxia, so wretched? Of course, Zhang Xiaohua still looked expectantly at the masked Chen Chun, who was sitting at the head of the table. He hoped that she would give the order to take off Zhao Jian's pants and verify his identity. After all, peeping alone was vulgar, but everyone was curious. Unfortunately, Chen Chen's face was covered by a veil. Zhang Xiaohua could not see if she lowered her shy face like the other female disciples and did not know her current mood. Well, Zhang Xiaohua still overestimated Chen Chen's curiosity. How could Chen Chun, who was in her 20s, sit still and do nothing? The masked Chen Chen shouted, Zhao Jian, let me ask you, what is the first rule of the incense cult? Hearing this, Zhao Jian's face turned ashen and he did not dare to answer. Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. He really did not know what the first rule of the Xiangism was. Chen Chen sneered. I'm afraid you don't dare to say it. Those who betray you will be punished. You have long forgotten the first rule of the Xiangism. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua laughed in her heart. It was indeed the Xiangism. If you hurt a brother, you would only be killed. But if you betrayed your heart, you would be punished. This was really unreasonable. Lord Hierarch said that if you set up such a trap to kill all your opponents for the sake of fame and fortune, then you can be considered an ambitious and ruthless person. Seeing that you're a talent, it's not necessarily impossible to pardon you. But you betrayed her, and even wanted to kill her. If the heavens did not let her be saved by Zhang Xiaohu, then wouldn't the leader have made a big mistake? Then, she stood up from the chair and took out the jade talisman. She said seriously, the leader has decreed that Zhao Jian betrayed her heart and killed her. He will be executed immediately. Everyone in the hall was surprised. They knew that Zhao Jian was going to die, but they did not expect that he would die in such a way. However, although everyone was surprised, they did not have the slightest bit of pity in their hearts. Even Zhang Xiaohua could not help but feel sorry for this sect master whom he had never met before. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua already knew the whole story. He knew that Zhao Jian was the main culprit who harmed his second brother. He had long since drawn a red cross on Zhao Jian's face in his heart, and the leader's execution made him feel great. When Zhao Jian heard this, his face, which was originally calm, immediately turned pale. He rushed to Zhong Pei's feet and hugged his legs. He howled, Vice Hall Master Zhong, you have to help me. This little one only followed your instructions and did these things. This happened you. Zhong Pei was furious and kicked Zhao Jian away. He scolded, you dog slave. I only gave you a straw, but you used it as a banner. You have such great ability, how can I give you instructions? Zhao Jian, who had been kicked to the ground, came to Xiaozai's side. As though he was grabbing onto a life-saving straw, he held onto her hand and said, Senior Sister Xia, I was possessed for a moment. You must remember my kindness and plead with the sect leader. I will serve you for the rest of my life and treat you well. Really, I will love you just like in the Yulon Grand Canyon. Ah. Then, there was a cry of surprise. -3. Chapter 725. Zhao Jian's hand grabbed Xia Zai's left arm. In a moment of desperation, how could he still control his strength? With just a stretch of his hand, he took out Xia Zai's left hand that was hidden in her sleeve. What he touched was not the smooth and soft hand that he had imagined. Instead, it was like an ice-cold thin bamboo. When he took a closer look, he realized that what he was holding in his hand was a white bone that did not have a single bit of good flesh. It wasn't neat to begin with, and with this grab, it was a mess of flesh and blood. This immediately frightened Zhao Jian, and he cried out in shock. At this moment, Xia Zai, who was lying on her back, lifted her veil and revealed her skeleton-like face to Zhao Jian. After Zhao Jian exclaimed in shock, he immediately let go of Xia Zai's hand and took a few steps back with the force of his feet. Just as he took a step back, Zhao Jian came to his senses and was about to take another step forward when he heard Xia Zai's cold laughter. Junior brother Zhao, after seeing me like this, you still dare to sleep beside me at night? Aren't you afraid that I will strangle your neck with my cold hands? Zhao Jian naturally hesitated. At this moment, he heard the masked Chun Qin shout, "Where are the disciplinary disciples? Take this heartless man down and kill him by 1,000 cuts. Feed his flesh to the stray dogs." Just as he finished speaking, 2 of the inner disciples that Chen Chun had brought with him stepped out and walked toward Zhao Jian. When Zhao Jian saw them, he knew that there was no hope and he was about to make a final struggle. However, the moment he moved, the disciplinary disciples' fingers were already in front of Zhao Jian's eyes. Before Zhao Jian could make a move, all of his major acupoints were sealed. Then, the 2 of them skillfully grabbed one arm each and dragged Zhao Jian out of the ethereal hall. "Vice Hall Master Zhong, save me. Senior Sister Xia, I was wrong. I will accompany you forever." "Lord Chen, save me in the end," he said. "Junior brother Zhong, say something. Think about our brotherhood back then. It was a classic case of begging for help at the brink of death." Zhao Jian's voice didn't stop even after he was outside. First, he begged for help, then he cursed, and finally, he let out a heart-wrenching scream. The masked Chen Chun looked at the disciples in the misty palace and said with a smile, "Are you interested in seeing this guy's miserable state?" However, the hall was completely silent. No one made a sound. Zhang Xiaohua was extremely anxious. This was the legendary death by 1,000 cuts. They had to take a look and broaden their horizons. Moreover, this Zhao Jian had harmed her second brother heavily. Seeing his miserable state could be considered as venting their anger. It was a pity that Zhang Xiaohua's spiritual sense was only 10 feet long at this time. Otherwise, she would have already released it. After the time it took to eat a meal, Zhao Jian's howls gradually became softer. It was obvious that he had run out of strength. The masked Chen Qian opened his mouth and said, "Our sect's punishment of death by 1,000 cuts is usually carried out for 3 days and 3 nights. We have to let the victim taste all kinds of pain before he dies. However, this is Shirxin Peak, so we'll keep it simple and only let this guy have a little advantage. All of you male disciples, go out and take a look. Remember the consequences of being unfaithful." Then he said to Zhang Xiaohua and Xiaoyao, "You go and take a look too." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and deliberately asked, "Lord Qin, do I have to go too?" "Yes, you have to take a look." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. She couldn't help but ask, "Why? If I tell you to go, then go. How dare you disobey my orders?" Chen Qin didn't explain at all. Zhang Xiaohua curled her lips. She got up and followed the male disciples to the open space in front of the misty palace. In the middle of the open space was a thick wooden stake, and Zhao Jian was tied up on it. His entire body was drenched in blood, and even his face was covered in flesh and blood. He could no longer be seen as a human. At this moment, Zhao Jian was already out of breath, and he groaned in a low voice, too. "Senior, brothers, please, give me a quick death, please." The 2 law enforcement disciples turned a deaf ear to his pleas. The 2 sharp knives in their hands continuously cut off pieces of flesh from Zhao Jian's body. Zhang Xiaohua was curious at first, but after a few glances, she couldn't help feeling disgusted. A person could only die with his head on the ground. This kind of torture was indeed against the heavens. But when she thought about what Zhao Jian had done, Zhang Xiaohua could only sigh. It's not that the time isn't up. When the time is up, the pain inflicted on others will be returned 1,000 times. It was unknown whether it was due to Zhao Jian's tenacity or the lingering fragrance peak's law enforcement disciples' special methods, but after another hour, Zhao Jian's flesh was completely shaved off, revealing his eerie white bones. Only then did Zhao Jian gradually stop breathing amidst his miserable groans. Not only Zhang Xiaohua, but the other male disciples of the Misty Hall were also pale. Their breathing was rapid, and their foreheads were slightly sweaty. It seemed that they had been taught a good lesson. They no longer dared to do such things in the incense cult, such as liking the new and hating the old. Seeing that Zhao Jian had died, the two law enforcement disciples found something from the side and cleaned up his remains and the flesh on the ground. They took it outside, presumably to find the wild dog. However, in the cult of fragrance, this wild dog might not be easy to find. It was unknown how the two of them completed Chen Qin's instructions. Zhang Xiaohua and the other male disciples returned to the Misty Hall. They were still standing or sitting, waiting for Chen Qin to speak. Chen Qin looked around and cleared his throat. Well, since Zhao Jian has been executed, this envoy has successfully completed 2 of the 3 things that I came here for. Everyone stared blankly for a moment, their hearts thumping wildly as they searched their minds for any heartless actions they might have done. At this time, Qin Qian said slowly, the ancient said, good people don't live long, bad people live for 100 years. However, now that the bad people are dead, our good people are still living very well, yes, although there are some injuries. Well, back to the topic, the bad people have been punished. What's next? Will the good people be rewarded? That tone, that method of arousing people's curiosity, it was really comparable to the storytellers in the tea house. Well, perhaps Chen Qin had learned it from them. Seeing that everyone's eyes were shining, Chen Qin was very happy. He waved his hand again, and a girl behind him came up and handed Chen Qin a brocade box. Chen Qin took it and walked to Zhang Xiaohu. Zhang Xiaohu, the hierarch has heard of your deeds and is very pleased. Your martial arts are not high, but you care about your senior sisters and junior sisters. Even if you don't sacrifice your own life, you still want to keep them safe. You are a role model for all the male disciples of the cult of fragrance. If you don't reward people like you, how can you convince the others? Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua unconsciously touched his nose and secretly said, Isn't this talking about Xiaoxia? Unfortunately, in his story, Zhang Xiaohu was the protagonist. He was the little medicine boy of the Tuoden Hall who was saved by Zhang Xiaohu. Qin Qian continued, not only did you save your own disciple of the Misty Hall, but you also saved other disciples along the way. Although Xia Zai is a disciple of the Misty Hall, you didn't know it when you saved her. You have always treated her as an inner disciple. It shows that in your heart, no matter which peak the disciples are from, they are all your brothers and sisters, and you treat them equally. This really shows that you are kind and broad-minded. You are a disciple worthy of training in the cult of fragrance. Therefore, His Excellency the cult leader has decreed that he will give you a copy of the Suhuan Heart Sutra and 3 Suhuan pills to help you improve your internal strength and have stronger martial arts. He will also carry forward the tradition of mutual help and friendship among the disciples of the cult of fragrance. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he was overjoyed. His second brother's torture for the past 10 days had not been in vain. Even the fragrant religion's lord had personally bestowed him a pill. Although Zhang Xiaohua had never heard of this plain pill before, he was sure that it was a pill that could increase one's cultivation. As for the plain aura cultivation method, it was probably not much worse than the ethereal divine art. However, when these things were placed in front of Zhang Xiaohu's eyes, they did not arouse any gratitude from Zhang Xiaohu. Wasn't this nonsense? His internal strength had been crippled by Zhao Jian. Even if he took these pills and skills, what use would it be? The masked Qin Qian saw Zhang Xiaohu's incomparably clear eyes and couldn't help but think to himself, I admire him. He really is a direct disciple of the Misty School. If he hadn't practiced the secret skills of the Misty School, How could he not be tempted by these things? His Excellency the cult leader is truly wise. Thus, he said to Chen, Chen, your senior brother Zhang's hands and feet are inconvenient. You take them for him first. Yang Ruping, who was sitting below Chen, had a drastic change in expression when she heard that the cult leader had bestowed the pills in the Suhuan Heart Sutra. When she heard that Chen was to take them, she couldn't help but stand up and say, Envoy Chen, please wait. The masked Chen revealed a knowing smile. He turned around and asked, Hall Master Yang, do you have any objections to the cult leader's decree? Yang Ruping shook her head and said, this disciple doesn't dare to question the cult leader's decree. It's just that. I want to ask Envoy Chen, these Heart Sutra and pills, are they mistaken? The masked Chen smiled and said, when this envoy came down from the Lingxiang Peak, I personally went to the pill room and the skill room to take these things. How can they be wrong? This, Yang Ruping pondered for a moment and said while gritting her teeth, but the cult leader is wise. Zhang Xiaohu is a direct disciple of the Misty school and his teacher is Wan Hai. He practices the ethereal skill, a secret mental cultivation method of the Misty school, and he has already succeeded in it. This internal strength mental cultivation method is the hard yang one, while the Suhuan mental cultivation method is the soft yin one, which is the internal strength mental cultivation method practiced by the female disciples of the school. If Zhang Xiaohu didn't practice the ethereal skill, he could practice the Suhuan mental cultivation method, which is a gift from the cult leader. But now, if he practices the Suhuan mental cultivation method, isn't it like pouring water on the fire? It's very easy to go mad. Hearing this, Wan Hai's expression suddenly changed. The other disciples' envy also turned into sympathy. Yes, the masters in Jianghu all practiced one kind of hard yang or soft in internal strength. Few people practiced both at the same time. Although there were very few people who practiced both at the same time, very few people succeeded. These people were all rare geniuses in Jianghu. Was Zhang Xiaohu such a genius? Absolutely not. He started practicing internal strength at the age of 18. If he practiced two completely different kinds of internal strength mental cultivation methods at the same time, he would definitely go mad. -3. Chapter 726. Hearing Yang Ruping's question, the masked Chen smiled and said, Hall Master Yang's doubts have already been considered by Lord Sect Leader. This Zhang Xiaohu has only cultivated the ethereal divine art for 4 to 5 years and is only at the entry level. Even if he cultivates for another 30 to 50 years, it is still impossible for him to reach the peak. However, if he cultivates the Yuhuan mantra, with the help of the Yuhuan pill, he can definitely reach the next level in a short period of time. It is also possible for him to reach the peak of the Yuhuan mantra within 20 years. But Yang Ruping still wanted to continue, but she was stopped by the masked Chen. Chen said coldly, Hall Master Yang, I respect you as my senior sister, so I have always answered your questions. But don't you think it's disrespectful to His Excellency when you keep questioning me when I'm passing on the decree of His Excellency? If it was anyone else, this envoy would have already taken them down. Thus, I ask Hall Master Yang to sit down quietly. It won't be too late to continue after the decree is passed on. Yang Ruping's face darkened, and she lowered her head and returned to her seat. Seeing that when Wan Hai was about to stand up, the masked Chen immediately said, Hero Zhang Xiaohu, you should also sit down. This is merely a gift from Lord Sect Leader to Zhang Xiaohu. There is no need to implicate too many people. It is better for him to choose what is more important and what is less important. After speaking, she handed the brocade box to Chen. Chen quickly looked at Zhang Xiaohu. What choice did Zhang Xiaohu have? In his heart, he was just a cripple. What ethereal divine art? What Yuhuan mantra? They had nothing to do with him. Since it was a gift from Lord Sect Leader, it was fine for him to take it. Perhaps he could leave it for Chang'e to use in the future. Thus, he didn't need to think too much and nodded slightly. Very good. The masked Chen smiled and casually handed the brocade box to Chen. She turned around and sat back in her seat. Then, he looked at Yang Ruping and said with a smile, Hall Master Yang, this envoy has completed the 3 tasks ordered by Sir Religion Master. If Hall Master Young has any questions, you can ask them now. Then, he changed the topic and said, however, before we came, Lord Sect Leader had already instructed us that the foundation of Zhang Xiaohu's misty divine art is very shallow. Moreover, it conflicts with the Su Huan Heart Sutra, so we might as well dissolve the inner strength that he had cultivated in the past. This, Yang Rupiang and Wen Wenhai were both shocked. However, Qinshan waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, I've already checked his meridians just now. There's no internal energy in his meridians. Only some of the cinnabar fruit's medicinal effects are still there. This saves me a lot of effort." Then he cast a sideways glance at Zhong Pei and said, "This might be a good deed done by some people. However, now it has helped Zhang Xiaohu. He can directly cultivate the Suhuan heart technique." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu was greatly shocked. That day, Zhao Jian's palm had indeed hit his dantian. Zhao Jian had even checked it. How could the envoy of lingering fragrance peak not notice it now? However, if Zhao Jian's palm had no effect, where did his decades of internal energy go? At this time, he heard the masked Qinshan say, "In addition, Sir Religion Master knows that Zhang Xiaohu is a direct disciple of the original Misty School. Considering that the cultivation method of the Misty School is not bad, he gave extra grace and agreed that Zhang Xiaohu can also cultivate the Misty Divine Art in addition to cultivating the Suhuan Heart Technique." Although these words were dignified, the meaning was clear. That was, Zhang Xiaohu must first cultivate the Suhuan Heart Technique before he can cultivate the Misty Divine Art, as long as he is not afraid of Qigong deviation. Alas, Yang Rupiang and Wen Wenhai both sighed in their hearts. The situation was stronger than the person. Since they were under the roof of the fragrance cult, it was impossible for them to not listen to Sir Religion Master's orders. They could only cup their hands and say, "Thank you, Sir Religion Master, for your grace." Good, good, good. The masked Qinshan clapped his hands and said, "Since everyone is very happy, this envoy's trip can be considered to have ended satisfactorily." Then, he glanced at Zhang Xiaohua, who was sitting at the end of the table, and said to Yang Rupiang, "Master Yang, Ren Xiaoyao of the Pill-Expanding Hall was saved by Zhang Xiaohu of the Misty Hall, and he also helped Xia Zai of the Misty Hall to set her bones and heal her wounds. Now he is a disciple on duty in the Pill-Expanding Hall of the Misty Hall. It is estimated that there will be a long time in the future. I hope you won't be too harsh on him for the sake of the monk." This kind of thing was really insignificant to Yang Rupiang. Moreover, the Misty Hall had changed a lot at this time, so how could she care about this? She nodded naturally and said yes. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly went forward to greet Yang Rupiang and Aunt Qin again and thank Qinshan. At this time, the masked Qinshan said to Qinshan, "Qinshan, come here." Qinshan was puzzled. She looked at Chang'e and walked to the masked Qinshan. The masked Qinshan carefully looked up and down for a while and said with a smile, "What a lovely child. You almost died under the trap of Zhao Jian." After that, she took out a jade pendant and threw it to Qinshan. Qinshan took it and heard the masked Qinshan say with a smile, "Well, I know you now. Qinshan, if you are bullied in the fragrance cult in the future, you can tell them my name. I guarantee that no one will dare to take advantage of you." Qinshan was stunned and turned to look at Chang'e. Seeing Chang'e nod, she said softly, "I just don't know. Sister's name is..." This sister was really forced. It was even more awkward than Zhang Xiaohua that day. The masked Qinshan seemed to have guessed the answer to the riddle and was in a very good mood. He laughed and said, "Although it's not easy for others to remember my sister's name, it's really easy for you to remember." Zhang Xiaohua, who knew the details, couldn't help curling her lips secretly and still sneered. Qinshan said softly, then, "Sister, please tell me." "Qinshan." The masked Qinshan said, "Yes, Lord Messenger, please tell me." "Qinshan." The masked Qinshan still said. Qinshan was a little embarrassed and said, "Yes, Qinshan is here. Lord Messenger, please tell me." The masked Qinshan suppressed the smile in her heart and said, "Qinshan." Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but chuckle and whisper, "Junior Sister Chun, the messenger of the fragrance peak is also called Qinshan." "Ah?" Qinshan exclaimed and revealed many small canine teeth in her mouth. The masked Qinshan smiled and took her hand, saying, "Qinshan, in the future, you will be protected by Qinshan in the fragrance cult, Chen was also happy and bowed. Thank you, Sister Chen. Ha ha ha. The masked Chen turned to Yang Ruping and said with a smile, well, I have finished my mission and there are many things to do in the Misty Hall. I won't disturb Master Yang. Yang Ruping pretended that she couldn't persuade Chen to stay, so she led the disciples to send Chen to the Fragrance Peak. As the representative of the Pill Expanding Hall, Zhang Xiaohua was also lucky to be there. When they were about to leave, Chen called Zhang Xiaohua to her and asked in a low voice, Ren Xiaoyao, let me ask you, are there any secret marks on your body? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and asked confusedly, I don't think so. What's wrong? Chen smiled mysteriously and said, you have held my hand and got married. Have you been touched all over your body? If you have any other thoughts, you'd better check your entire body first. If there are any hidden marks that you don't know about, you'd better get rid of them as soon as possible. Don't wait for others to come knocking on your door. You'd be at a complete loss. Zhang Xiaohua fell off the horse with a plop. Chen laughed and went down Serene Peak. When Chen and his group were halfway down, a figure appeared between the rocks not far away. It was Zhang Xiaohua who had found an excuse to follow them down. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the dispirited Zhong Pei who was riding a horse with his head drooped. In the Misty Hall, when Zhang Xiaohua saw her second brother being tortured to extort a confession, she wanted to kill him. Only Chen of the Fragrant Peak acted swiftly and decisively. He even alienated the disciples of the Misty Hall and made it watertight. There was no chance for him to vent his anger on Zhang Xiaohua. Although Zhang Xiaohua was slightly relieved by Zhao Jian's death, Lingxiang Peak prioritized the inner disciples and did not directly pursue Zhong Pei. This made Zhang Xiaohua very unhappy, so she found an excuse to go down the mountain to find trouble with Zhong Pei. Unfortunately, Zhong Pei was among the inner disciples and was not far behind Chen. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense was more than 10 feet, and the flying sword could not reach him. After thinking for a moment, Zhang Xiaohua cast a spell and directly went to the feet of the inner disciples. She took out her small sword and was ready to kill. At this time, she heard Chen call out, Zhong Pei, come over here. Envoy Chen, what's the matter? Zhong Pei naturally urged his horse forward. Envoy Chen. These words immediately awakened Zhang Xiaohua. Chen was now the envoy of Lingxiang Peak. She had rashly killed Zhong Pei at Serene Peak. Although it was true that she wanted to vent her anger, but this time, she had implicated the entire Misty Hall. Even Chen, the inner disciple's envoy, might be implicated. Moreover, he might be able to hide his face, but his figure could be clearly seen in broad daylight. No matter how incompetent Chen of Lingering Fragrance Peak was, it was impossible for him not to discover that the person who had ambushed him was him. In this way, he was likely to be investigated. Needless to say, the matter of Deputy Hall Master Su would also be exposed. Following that, Yang Yao and Rejuvenation Valley would most likely be in a bad situation. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and secretly gritted her teeth. She returned to the mountain rocks and looked at the group of inner disciples who were gradually disappearing. She fiercely said, Old dog Zhong, you have escaped today. But don't worry, Xiaoxia, will definitely take revenge. Hee, isn't it just Lingxiang Peak? After I have cured my second brother's injury, I will definitely go and find you. With that, she punched the huge crouching ox rock beside her. With a loud explosion, it was smashed into pieces. In the distance, the inner disciples seemed to have heard the sound and vaguely looked over. That Zhang Xiaohua had already escaped. Where was her human form? It was already late at night. In a lonely small courtyard near the cliff of Serene Peak, a tall and thin figure was standing in the middle of the courtyard. She stood with her hands behind her back and silently watched everything in the night. This person was Zhang Xiaohua, the disciple on duty of the Pill Expanding Hall. After she failed to kill Zhong Pei, she returned to the Misty Hall. Aunt Qin had already arranged for the disciple in charge to wait beside her and make a good place for Zhang Xiaohua. Because of Chen's instructions to Yang Ruping and the familiarity between Zhang Xiaohua and Chen, the disciple of the Misty Hall did not dare to neglect her. However, the residence of the disciple on duty of the Pill Expanding Hall was far from the Misty Hall. It was impossible for the Misty Hall to move the residence of the Pill Expanding Hall to the left of the Misty Hall just for Zhang Xiaohua. Therefore, looking at the apologetic expression of the disciple of the Misty Hall, Zhang Xiaohua felt gratified for a while. After the disciple of the Misty Hall left, Zhang Xiaohua brought her big black horse and David's deer in. After a few days of getting along, Huan Huan had somewhat adapted to the aura of Little Black and Little Yellow. Occasionally, she could get close to them. At this time, she was led by Zhang Xiaohua and did not feel panic. This was a very tidy little courtyard. There were 2 entrances and 2 exits, and there were a few small rooms. Zhang Xiaohua looked around carefully, and there was nothing that was out of the ordinary. Hence, he randomly picked one of the rooms to be his room and threw some of his belongings inside. She should have checked the situation around the small courtyard at this time. However, it was late at night, and it was difficult to see clearly. Besides, Zhang Xiaohua was seriously injured. Although Zhang Xiaohua had checked with her divine sense in the Misty Hall, she did not have a real diagnosis after all, so she was not at ease. Moreover, Chen Chan said that there was no internal force in his meridians, which made Zhang Xiaohua even more depressed. When they parted a few days ago, he just had more than 20 years worth of internal force. How could there be no internal force in such a short time? Others might not know, but Zhang Xiaohua was very clear about it. He immediately felt that there was something fishy going on, but whether it was Zhong Pei or Zhao Jian, he was not sure. He could only find out if he went to Zhang Xiaohu and asked him personally. However, Zhang Xiaohu had just been released from the dungeon and was seriously injured. There should be many disciples around, and she did not know if it would be inconvenient to visit him now. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua stood in the courtyard and thought about whether she should visit second brother. After thinking for a while and looking at the sky, Zhang Xiaohua finally made up her mind. She cast a spell and went underground, heading straight to the Misty Hall in the day. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua arrived at the side of the Misty Hall. At this time, the Misty Hall was still brightly lit. Many things had happened during the day, and Yang Rupiying and the others were probably still discussing what to do after Zhong Pei left. Zhang Xiaohua sneaked into the Misty Hall and revealed herself in an inconspicuous corner. At this time, the candles in the Misty Hall were flickering. There were no Zhang Xiaohua, Zhang Xiaohu, Chang'e, and Chen Chun, but only Yang Rupiying and Aunt Qin. Zhang Xiaohua looked around and wanted to escape, but she heard Yang Rupiying say, "Deputy Hallmaster Qin, today in the Misty Hall, Zhang Xiaohu's behavior was a little abnormal. I think." When he said this, he stopped. Aunt Qin asked, "Hallmaster Yang, if you have something to say, please say it." Vice Hallmaster Qin, don't you think that Zhang Xiaohu didn't decline at all and directly accepted the Su Huan Heart Sutra? Is it because he wants to accept Sir Hierarch's goodwill and let the Misty School? -3. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.